about the flash drive.
All right, commissioners, if we could ask you to move towards your seats, please. All right.
Well, my side of the aisle over here is full.
Yes, it is.
You're leaving me alone over here.
Bert? There's a prize for the side that's fully seated first, commissioners. All right, we welcome you all to our afternoon session of this, the third hearing of the Long-Term Care Commission. Commissioners, you'll actually find on your table in front of you a thumb drive. This is yours to keep. We ask you to bring it back at the next meeting. On it, you'll find all the public comment and testimony we've received through the website so far, which is gives me another opportunity to encourage all of you in the audience, to the degree you'd like to share with us, www.longtermcarecommission.senate.gov. There we go. So we invite public comment and input, and that's the process for doing so. And just in case there's any question whether all the commissioners read it or not, you now know the answer is yes. With that, I want to go right into our third panel. This afternoon, we're going to be looking at the private insurance, long-term care insurance market, and the interaction between public programs and private insurance. So we'll begin with panel 3, focusing on private insurance. And with that, I'd like to welcome David Grabowski, please. Oh, and I guess I would say, just to remind everybody the rules, it is 10 minutes per speaker. I will stop you at 10 minutes. It'll be 5 minutes of questions per commissioner. Same rules as this morning. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bruce, and thanks to the rest of the commission for inviting me to address you today. I'd like to start with 2 facts to motivate my testimony. The first is that long-term care is currently the largest source of unprotected out-of-pocket spending risk for older adults. That's the first fact. The second fact is that the private long-term care insurance market has largely remained quite limited over the last several decades. Only 10% of individuals currently have private long-term care insurance. And so thinking about those 2 facts together, I have 2 goals for my remarks today. First, I'm going to discuss why historically people haven't purchased private long-term care insurance. And then second, I'm going to put forward a set of policies that I think in the next 10 to 15 years can begin to grow this marketplace. So I want to start with a policy design challenge. I'm going to take 2 options off the table right at the outset here. First, I think it's highly unlikely in the next 10 to 15 years that we're going to see social insurance for long-term care. On the other end of the spectrum, I think it's also fairly unlikely we're going to see major cuts to the Medicaid program over that same time period. So I'm going to take those 2 options off the table. I'm going to think about options here that don't have a major impact on the budget. I'm not asking for new dollars here. I'm thinking about how we can redesign, how we sell these policies, how we buy these policies to grow this marketplace. So as promised, the first part of the talk is thinking about why historically people don't purchase private long-term care insurance. I'm an economist. I think about the world in terms of demand and supply, and I've divided these explanations into barriers as to why people won't buy these policies and why firms won't sell these policies. You've seen all of these explanations before, so I'm not going to read these to you. But I do want to stress a couple of points. One, if we're going to fix this market, we've got to overcome these barriers. And so that's the first point. The second point is I'm not arguing all of these barriers are created equal. The one on the lower left there, Medicaid crowd out, has obviously received a lot of attention. So let me take that on first. Can we even begin to grow this market in the context of the Medicaid program. Jeff Brown, who's going to be on the next panel, and Amy Finkelstein have a well-publicized paper that shows that Medicaid crowds out about 60% of potential purchasers of private long-term care insurance. Many people have taken that study and said we'll never have a market for private long-term care insurance. I agree with Jeff and Amy's work for that bottom tercile of the wealth distribution. There's no doubt crowd out is quite logical and likely for that population. Where I take issue with perhaps their work, with all due respect, is for that middle tercile and upper tercile of the wealth distribution. I think there's a lot more traction in this population than Jeff and Amy do. We have a working paper at Harvard, our team, suggesting that when you move, looking at buyer, non-buyer data, when you move from $50,000 in assets to $100,000 in assets, you see a big uptake in insurance purchase. This is one of several pieces of evidence I won't go through right now, suggesting there's more kind of response in that middle wealth population. The final point I'd make on this, even if we take their crowd out estimates at face value, that still suggests there's 40% of the market. We're currently at 10%. I would definitely argue we have room to grow. So here are my 5 ideas for growing this market. And obviously, I see the clock ticking on me. I'm not going to get a chance to spend 10 minutes on each of these ideas. But I do want to put them all 5 of them forward for further treatment. You can see the reference there. Richard Frank wrote a really nice piece for Bruce's group at SCAN that kind of spends a lot more time on each of these ideas and also puts forward a few other ideas on how to grow this market. But once again, I'm not asking for new dollars here. I'm thinking about reorienting how we buy and how we sell this product. So let me go through each one of these ideas in a little bit of detail. The first idea, and I really think this one is a no-brainer. Everyone that purchases or tries to purchase private long-term care insurance claims this is just too complex of a product. It's really hard to compare apples with apples. There's lots of features of this product. Why not make an electronic Medigap-like market in this area? This has been done in CalPERS in Minnesota, and maybe we'll hear a little bit about that. But you can simplify this market greatly, limit the number of choices so we know what's in Plan A, Plan B, and so forth, much like Medigap. We'll have unlimited number of sellers, but we'll have a finite number of plans here. We can also use decision aids in this electronic market to push people towards those options that may best suit their health and wealth and age needs. We can also alter state regulations to allow high deductible products. That's going to greatly lower premiums and bring more people into this market. I think if you do one thing, it's this. I think this is a no-brainer here. This is a very simple step. Simplify this market. This addresses the complexity and the confusion with the shopping. It really makes long-term care insurance into a commodity, and it could reduce premiums by as much as a third. The second idea is one that we've thought a lot about when it comes to the dual population, blending Medicaid and Medicare. There's no reason we couldn't do something very similar in this population, and that's trying to blend long-term care insurance with health insurance. I've used the example here on the slide of linking long-term care insurance with Medicare Advantage. There's no reason you couldn't do that with traditional Medicare or even with health insurance for the under 65 population. We basically mandate that any plan offering Medicare Advantage offers long-term care insurance. We could also use an opt-out feature, one of those behavioral economics, to nudge people into these policies. Not everybody, but for those for which we thought it was appropriate based on their age and wealth. The impact, once again, we reduce the sales costs, we reduce premiums here, we increase take-up, and we also maybe leverage some savings across long-term care and acute health care services. The third issue, and if you noticed on that list, we have really high selling costs in this market. That's due to the fact that it's largely an individual market. Many employers don't offer private long-term care insurance. The state of Minnesota, CalPERS, the Federal Health Employees Benefit Plan, those are great examples of employers offering historically long-term care insurance. We could greatly increase this market once again if we mandate that employers offer this policy. We can leverage economies of scale here to lower premium costs. We can eliminate medical underwriting in the group market. We can eliminate adverse selection to stabilize premiums. And we could also, much like that Medigap market, use employers to filter this product and reduce complexity and confusion. The fourth idea really stems from a lack of consumer confidence in this product. I think historically we've seen a lot of large rate increases, and many consumers don't believe that these companies or these policies are going to be around in 2 or 3 decades. On the provider side, on the firm side, they've had a lot of trouble spreading risks as well. And so this would actually fix both of those problems. Much like it did in flood and earthquake reinsurance, we should allow a publicly organized and privately funded reinsurance pool here. Once again, this is going to increase consumer confidence in the long-term care insurance product, and it's going to reduce those risk premiums. The final idea, and I'm really excited about this, my colleague Richard Frank has put together these estimates. Many people say we don't want to subsidize private long-term care insurance. Lo and behold, we actually do subsidize private long-term care insurance. These are annually how much we spend through different mechanisms in the tax code in subsidizing private long-term care insurance. You can see annually through these 3 pathways, we spend about $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion will buy you a lot of long-term care insurance. And so that's, those dollars are out there. The not so good news about this is that those dollars don't always go to the individuals that are at a high likelihood of spending down to Medicaid status. A good proportion of these dollars go to older individuals, and they go to wealthier individuals. We need to target individuals that are in that age 45 to 65 range that are at risk of spending down into Medicaid, so in that 30th to 50th distribution of the lifetime wealth. If we can target subsidies, take these subsidies that are going to sort of, quote unquote, the wrong individuals and target them to the appropriate people, we can increase long-term care insurance purchase and ultimately lessen the burden on Medicaid. So to sum up, I don't think Medicaid crowd-out is by any means a deal breaker. I think there's still a lot of long-term care insurance policies that could be sold if we reorient this market, both in how we sell this product and also the mechanisms by which we purchase it. I outlined 5 steps. I think all 5 of these are very doable. None of them mean a large increase in spending. In terms of thinking about what success might look like here, if we can move from 10% to 20%, I'd be willing to declare victory. And I don't know about you guys, but I would. So I'll stop on that point and thank the commission and look forward to comments and questions. Thanks.
Thank you, David. That was excellent. Next, we'll move to Lane Kent, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you today to offer a perspective on this important topic. I've been working in and around private long-term care insurance for the last 20 years or so, most recently running an insurance administration company responsible for all or some material portion of the administration of over 1.3 million policies, which is about 20% of the policies that are in force in the market today. And I've seen this market from every angle. I was asked to provide testimony today regarding the reasons long-term care insurance is not working and what innovative ideas should be considered to change this dynamic. The challenges facing insurers, consumers, regulators, and legislators in dealing with long-term care are well documented. So in the interest of looking forward, my remarks on those challenges will be somewhat brief, but of course I'll answer any questions that you may have about the past to the best of my ability. The factors contributing to the decline in sales of private long-term care insurance are the following. The first sellers had little experience to go by in terms of guiding them in designing the early product generations and were operating with a series of flawed pricing assumptions. Persistency is much higher than was anticipated, mortality is lower than was anticipated, and both of these have led to a higher incidence of claims or expected incidence of claims, which is the number of people who have or will file claims. Irrational market conditions made it difficult for responsible insurers to compete, and bad practices of the past included predatory pricing, unsound underwriting, and agent-driven compensation models. These flawed assumptions and practices have in large part been fixed, and the market has weeded out the irresponsible players. The problems are behind us, but other difficult conditions remain, which is why sales continue to be depressed. Challenging environmental factors today include low interest rates, out of order here. Rigid product requirements, insurance department approval practices, and the inability of insurers to get rate increases as necessary. These issues and poorly performing older business or closed blocks have led to diminishing supply, with insurers exiting new sales in mass. Just a dozen or so remain actively selling individual policies today, and only one group insurer remains in the business. So there's a definite supply issue. Popular product features are no longer being offered. Agents and brokers who sell the products are completely disenfranchised. And the heavy surplus strain required to sell new products, new policies, coupled with a very scarce reinsurance capacity, makes it difficult to continue selling for insurers, and it also creates a prohibitive barrier for new entrants. The troubles of the private long-term care insurance industry have taken a toll on consumer demand as well. The industry collectively has done very little by way of advertising and awareness, and as a result, confusion remains pervasive regarding the role of Medicare and health insurance in covering expenses associated with chronic and custodial care. Premiums are becoming unaffordable for the middle market, and Medicaid remains the option by design or by default for too many, although I agree with my colleague David that there is not a crowd-out issue here, but it is certainly a part of the problem. Despite past and present challenges, however, there exists a number of workable ideas which would encourage product innovation and planning by consumers for successful aging, even when faced with a dependency or disability. With cost being the number one reason cited by non-buyers in their decision not to purchase, alternative funding sources and incentives to raise demand and attract new suppliers must be at the top of the list when considering different approaches, in my opinion. Tax-exempt and penalty-free distributions from qualified retirement plans would materially reduce the impact of premiums on disposable income for working populations, directly addressing the cost issue even with the existing product sets. Penalty-free distribution from retirement plans would allow payment of premiums without forcing consumers to find new discretionary sources of funds, again addressing the cost issue. Long-term care insurance should be Section 125 eligible, cafeteria plan eligible, so that pre-tax dollars can be used to pay premiums and to improve access to products through an electronic marketplace, as David was alluding to, payroll deduction, online enrollment. We have an access problem today with this product. And also to encourage commercial health insurance suppliers to enter the market with new simplified plans and address the distribution costs, which are too high in the market today. The current law allows for health savings account funds to be used to buy long-term care insurance. However, annual contribution caps do not allow sufficient funds to be put into HSAs annually to cover the deductibles and costs they're intended to cover and also pay long-term care insurance premiums. So it's not a viable solution, even though the law provides for it. A federal above-the-line income tax deduction for premiums like those in place in a handful of states would effectively lower the cost of insurance as well. Current HIPAA rule allows for inflation index deduction, but only after itemization of non-reimbursed medical expenses exceeding 7.5% of adjusted gross income, which is a threshold most people can't meet because long-term care insurance holders are healthier by default because they've passed an underwriting exam. But perhaps the most compelling ideas to consider are those which would align long-term care with the rest of health care, with acute care. As David mentioned, standardized supplements to wrap around Medicare Advantage and fee-for-service Medicaid would include options that emphasize post-acute care and custodial home-based care and catastrophic risk mitigation. Standardization would also simplify the education process, reducing some of the variability in plan designs between competing insurers. This less complicated sales process would increase buyer interest and thereby lower distribution costs. All these things work in favor of addressing some of the objections to buyers today. In Israel, commercial health insurers offer long-term care insurance. It's not a mandate, but it's a competitive mandate, if you will. As a result, product penetration in that country is much higher than what it is here. And an offer, a mandate, as David suggested, for Medicare Advantage offers would be, I think, a great step in the right direction. Certainly would increase the discussion and awareness around the product. Some of the most fundamental principles in healthcare are non-existent in long-term care insurance today. Preferred provider networks with negotiated rates, co-insurance, incentives for healthy behavior, and the use of data analytics to facilitate early and targeted intervention are all proven to reduce costs and improve outcomes in acute care. And these principles can work in chronic and custodial care as well. Modifications to existing long-term care insurance products should also be considered. Attained age pricing is one. Sales would increase with more widespread acceptance by regulators of short-term care and high-deductible plans, as they would also benefit from dependency-tiered benefit triggers and reimbursement models like those that are used in Europe today, where product penetration is also about double what we have here in the United States. Financial planning linked benefit style products are slowly making their way into the market, and I know Jason's going to speak about this in length, but life insurance, critical illness, disability, and annuity products combined with long-term care benefits encourage lifelong savings and planning by associating the financial risks of aging to other commonly insured financial risks such as premature death, disability, and longevity. And finally, we should offer long-term care insurance through the new exchanges where millions of Americans will soon shop for their insurance coverage. Education makes a difference. States conducting Own Your Future awareness campaigns have materially higher levels of requests for product information. Industry research has identified the attributes of buyers as positive realists. Demand is strong among groups demonstrating these buyer characteristics. However, limited supply of affordable products and unfavorable economic conditions have put these products out of reach for most people who need it. A great deal has been learned from the failures of the pioneers of the private long-term care insurance market. Insurers entering the market today do so with sound pricing and underwriting practices. Active sellers are achieving sustainable growth, and bad actors have left the market. The convergence of acute, post-acute, and subacute care and the movement towards accountable care holds great promise for addressing chronic care as an extension of healthcare with new emphasis on home-based support and holistic care planning. The Duals initiatives and bundle payment for care improvement initiatives being sponsored by the CMS Innovations Office will test new models of care. Let us apply those learnings to long-term care. Providing care for those with chronic conditions and custodial needs is really not complicated. Most care, in fact, is provided by people who are non-skilled and many are untrained. What has become complicated is paying for the care. But the lens through which we view private long-term care insurance today is too narrow. No single product will solve this issue. The solution will be multifaceted with a combination of funding reforms, a blend of financial planning and health insurance concepts, and a more diverse set of suppliers creating new access and demand. It's essential we create an environment that's conducive to collaboration and innovation to ease the burden on Medicaid and ensure that safety net is strong enough to catch those of us who lack the means to insure this risk. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I appreciate the opportunity to participate, and if I can be of any further service to this commission, please let me know. I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll turn to Jason Brown from the Treasury Department, please.
Thank you. Thank you all for allowing me to come and speak to you. I should also say the usual caveat that I am from the Treasury Department, but my views expressed here are not those of the Treasury Department. So what I'd like to talk about today are combination long-term care products. Ordinarily, long-term care insurance must be sold as a standalone product, but there are some exceptions, and those are what I want to talk about today and why they're interesting. So there are a few cases in which long-term care insurance can be purchased with other policies, as Lane mentioned. Life insurance, so you would buy life insurance with a long-term care rider, and that would allow you to accelerate your death benefits in the event that you need long-term care services. Deferred annuities, in which you purchase a deferred annuity, pay a premium, and you've got some guaranteed return on the sort of the annuity portion, but then you also have this pot of money that you can access in case you need long-term care. And then finally, there's the immediate life annuity, and that would be a case, well, as I'll explain further, it's called the life care annuity. And then in this case, in exchange for a premium or a series of premium, a steady stream of income is promised with an increase in payments in the event of future disability. And although Lane could probably attest to this better than I can, my understanding is that the combination life insurance, long-term care, and is probably the most popular of these combined products. Deferred annuities have become, I think, a sort of a new and sort of interesting product. There's less, I think, experience with this life care annuity, but that's what I'm going to talk about anyway, because I think it's more interesting and it's something that I'm a little more familiar with. So the life care annuity is, as I mentioned, an integrated insurance product consisting of a life annuity and long-term care insurance segments. And it was developed by Chris Murtaugh, Brenda Spillman, and a man named Mark Grabowski. What happens is that you pay one or more premium payments, and the life care annuity pays us a stream of fixed periodic payments, such as the life annuity segment. And in the event of disability, it provides an additional payment to cover the costs associated with long-term care. And so, there's not, the product can be structured in several ways. The annuity payments can be fixed in nominal terms, increasing inflation index. And the long-term care portion can either be structured as a disability indemnity policy, so you have a couple of disabilities and that triggers the benefit, or it can be a reimbursement for long-term care services. And so the idea is that you would purchase this around the time of your retirement, it would protect you from two of the big major risks in retirement, as David alluded to. There's the longevity, but also the risk of outliving your assets, but also disability costs. So why is this? Why would you want to purchase this jointly? What's interesting about the combination of these two products? Well, there are shortcomings in both the life annuity product and long-term care insurance product that kind of offset each other when you put together into one product, and that's what I'm going to elaborate on. So life annuities, they're subject to adverse selection by low mortality classes, which raises the price relative to a product without adverse selection. So people don't want to buy a life annuity if they think they're going to die soon. So the product attracts people with above average remaining life expectancy, which raises the price of the product. On the other hand, long-term care insurance policies are underwritten to exclude high mortality classes because the level premium nature of the product means that a person has to pay in for several years before they can actually cover their expected claims costs. And so somebody who would be expected to claim benefits immediately or in the near term just doesn't pass underwriting. But if you can combine these two products, you might come up with a sort of a situation where you have this product that pulls in people with low life expectancy into the annuity so that they can get the long-term care coverage, and people with above average life expectancy into the pooled long-term care policy in order to get a cheaper annuity. And so the evidence, what's the evidence on that? So this has been researched, and in principle, this really can happen. Currently around 15 to 25% of the 65-year-old population is basically ineligible for long-term care insurance. And it's not because they're actually disabled, only 2 to 4% of that population is disabled. But there are a number of people in that, sort of at that age who've had a stroke, they're diabetic, they've had a heart attack, maybe they have lung disease. And what research has found is that these people with these health histories that are often the reason for denial of long-term care insurance coverage, it's not like their expected claims costs are really any higher than people in perfect health at that age. The difference is that their claims come sooner. And so, as a result, they can't pay in long enough to cover their expected claims, and that's why they're denied coverage. And so what the research has found, this is actually on gender-rated terms, reason why it's important to sort of like at least identify the separate gender effects is that women are expected to outlive men, and they also have higher expected long-term care costs. But a gender-rated life care annuity could be sold more cheaply than the two products sold separately, thanks to these offsetting longevity risks. One other benefit, aside from this sort of, or it's actually related to the fact that you're bringing in people with chronic illness or an adverse health history into this pool, is that it does allow people to delay long-term care insurance purchase till closer to retirement. If people, if one reason why people are buying long-term care insurance coverage at 50, 55 years old is that they're afraid of being denied it at age 65 because of some adverse health sort of event that may intervene, this would allow them to push back the decision to purchase long-term care insurance. And you can see this benefiting not just consumers, because they would like to have more time to sort of assess their needs in retirement, but it can also benefit insurers because basically it shortens the contract length. They're not trying to insure somebody's long-term care risk for 40, 50 years, but considerably shorter. And that kind of just reduces the risks that they bear with regard to interest rate or investment returns, longevity. We see there are some benefits on both sides. Just to talk a little bit about the kind of the tax and regulatory environment. So the Pension Protection Act of 2006 specifically recognized these combination long-term care insurance annuity products, which sort of confers the blessing of the government on this combined product. Without getting too detailed, the life care annuity does have slight tax advantages compared to, say, a standalone annuity and qualified long-term care insurance purchase. Now, and that's just for the after-tax life care annuity, but for a qualified retirement plan, Lane mentioned some of the challenges. There are, probably some regulatory or statutory hurdles. That just, and again, without going too deep into this, basically, the distribution requirements are just sort of intended for retirement income, and that's how the statute and the regulations were designed. So they don't really imagine policies that might have a bump up in payments, so if it's something food for thought for policy development, how you might think about incorporating a life care annuity into a qualified retirement plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, Bonnie Burns from the California Health Advocates.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've worked with consumers now for more than 30 years who need information about this product or who needed help in getting the benefits from it. In addition, I've worked for that same period of time with state legislators and federal legislators to enact changes to law when it became obvious that there were things that needed to be corrected. And I've worked with the NAIC since the inception of that program in 1992 as a funded consumer representative. So I have a sense of some of the issues that are involved in establishing standards that reach across the country, because states have their own issues and ideas about how to do things. People are generally confused about the whole issue of long-term care. Most people, if you talk to them about long-term care, the first thing they think of is a nursing home. So they have very poor understanding of what the whole field of long-term care is. And one of the results of that is when they need care, they're pretty much on their own for finding it. And it's their family members that are the ones who are going to be dealing with that issue, trying to find care for a family member, arrange it, monitor it, and figure out how to pay for it. And that involves a whole range of issues that I don't think you've talked about here, about the impact on families when somebody does need care, whether they have insurance or whether they don't. And it's something that you should consider about how complex that is and how fragmented it is, that people struggle to find those services for their family members. Attached to my testimony are examples of 5 of our family members who've dealt with trying to get long-term care for another family member. Also attached to that are 6 examples of people who had insurance and who have come to me over the last 2 years with a need to have an intervention so that they could get the benefits that they bought. So people are generally confused about the whole issue of long-term care, but they're also confused about long-term care insurance and how to pay for long-term care and what programs pay for it and what programs don't. There's generally people looking at this across a variety of age groups. There are people who are younger who are considering long-term care insurance and who know even less than older people do about it. And then there are older people who are looking at long-term care insurance at a certain stage of their life. But the reality is that a lot of the people who need long-term care insurance aren't going to be able to get it because they don't have enough money to pay for it, or because they have a health condition that's going to screen them out whether they can pay for it or not. And long-term care insurance policies themselves are very complex instruments. There are variations within the same company for a variety of products that are being sold for that particular loss. And there are variations across the country within the states. Consumers have no idea about what to buy, how much of it to buy, or if they should buy it at all, because there are no tools out there to help them evaluate this. It isn't simply a question of, I want it, I have enough money, sell it to me. It's a question of knowing some relationship between what it is they're buying, what their income is, what their assets are, and being able to afford it over, not just when they buy it, but across time. And many of you have seen in the papers, I'm sure, the extraordinary rate increases that people have been getting, including the CalPERS program, which has an 85% rate increase coming in 2015. And despite what we do at the NEIC, which we've done 3 times over about a 15-year period to try to control these rates, it seems that no matter what we do there, 10 years later, we find out whether it worked or not. So the NEIC has had 3 attempts and 3 failures to control these rates. And for people who get these rate increases in these older age groups, it's a very difficult situation for them to try to figure out whether they can keep these policies, whether they have to give them up after years of premium payment and lose all of the benefits that they've been paying for. There are difficulties getting these benefits because insurance companies interpret their benefits in a variety of ways. So people buy something that they think will pay a benefit, and when they go to use it, they find out that they're in the wrong place or the wrong person is providing the care, according to what the language of the contract says. Now, when you're buying a long-term care policy early on, you might have read it, you might have thought you understood it, but the issue is when you need to use that policy, you're not the one who's going to be getting going out and finding those services. Your family member is going to be doing that. Your family member may not even know you have a long-term care policy, but they certainly were not there when it was bought, and they certainly don't understand it. So despite the changes that happen over time in regulation in response to things that we've seen happen, the person who has to actually use that policy is going to be uninformed about what it is and is going to have to negotiate with the insurance company for those benefits. There's no way for people when they're buying these to figure out whether this is a good thing to do or not. They don't normally involve their families in that decision. The benefits are very difficult for people to understand, both when they buy them and when they go to use them. I would propose standardizing the benefits in these policies rather than standardizing the policies as was suggested. Medigap's a very different product. Long-term care insurance is something that relates to the person's income, their assets, and their ability to pay for these policies over time. They need consumer tools. They need some standardization in the benefits themselves so that when they buy a policy in one state and move to another, that they're able to use those benefits in the state that they've moved to. And that has become a problem because the services that are available across the country themselves are not standardized. And because they're not, neither are the benefits that are within a long-term care insurance policy. It may not be possible over time to control the rates in the way that we would all like to do. And that presents some real issues for the consumers if they don't have dependable premiums to rely on in their retirement. The people who are retiring today are people who have had the advantage of the defined benefit income and pensions. And the people who are retiring later are having a different set of benefits to rely on. So incomes may not be as certain as they've been in the past. And certainly when people's life situations change, their ability to pay for things changes. When a woman loses her husband, she may not be able to pay for the policy that they bought when they had both incomes. So there is a lot to be considered here in terms of these products, how well they will work for the population. In my view, I think they're part of the solution, but they are definitely not the solution to financing long-term care. And how much of a piece of that solution that they can be depends on a lot of individual factors. And with that, I'll end my testimony there and be happy to answer any questions.
Well, first, my thanks to all the panelists for a great set of presentations. Let me begin with Commissioner Claypool. We'll go around. 5 minutes a commissioner, please.
Thank you, and thanks to the panel. First, David, thank you for opening with a framing, I think, of what the future holds. And so I might want to just push back a little bit and say there might be another scenario, at least in the, maybe not in the near term, but in the midterm, there may be an opportunity for the nation to come forward and to rally around this issue and to come up with a more organized approach to addressing a long-standing problem. And, but I do appreciate that you laid that out for purposes of your presentation. So I wanted to turn to Bonnie, and since I'm really not very familiar with this, since I wouldn't pass underwriting and haven't really explored long-term care insurance, I wanted to see if you could help me walk through a scenario. Say someone who purchases a product early on, a long-term care insurance product, 35, 40 years old, they are paying in, they have some accident or they become disabled in some manner, and they are eligible to draw on their long-term care insurance policy at, say, age 52. Is it likely that that policy will pay out for an extended period of time?
Well, that's a really good question because it depends on what you bought. And it depends on how long the policy that you bought said it would pay for. So
Well, maybe I'll take us to the more structured scenario. I think that David was laying out, that there are these products that are a little more clear, maybe not as clear as you'd like in terms of the benefits that they offered, but I think you're proposing a little more structure to the market. And so I would assume that the benefit that would come along with this product would be time limited. It might not extend for the duration of someone's need. And so this person that's needing to draw on the product at age 52 is behaving rationally, doing the right things, buying a product that they think is going to cover their need, and I assume at some point that that benefit will become exhausted, and they might not be at the end of their life yet. Is that a wildly unrealistic scenario?
Oh, no, it's not, because when people buy long-term care insurance today, they choose how much dollar amount they want a day. They choose how many years they want the policy to last. That could be 1 year. It could be 5 years. It could be 7 years. It used to be lifetime, but those policies are not available anymore. And it also involves choosing where you want those benefits to be paid. So there are a number of choices that people make up front, and based on the offer that was available to them at that time. We talk about long-term care insurance as though it's a homogeneous product, but it isn't. I mean, it depends on what year you bought it, what designs were available in the year that you bought it, what choices you made about those products or about those benefits, and then what happens to you and where you need that care and who you're going to get it from. And, by the way, whether or not you decided not to take inflation protection, so you now have a very deficient benefit, or if you took an inflation protection offer that let you delay the cost of paying for it, so that if you took a future purchase option, for instance, and you said, no, I'm not going to pay for this up front, but every 3 years you give me that offer to buy inflation protection and tell me what it costs. Well, each time they offer that, you're older. So the cost of it goes up, and people price themselves, they end up being priced out of that inflation protection. So if your cost is $150 a day and you bought a policy 10 years ago at $50 a day because that's what the cost was, and you didn't take inflation protection, you now have a benefit that's far less than the cost.
Well, thank you for that. And in concluding, I'd just like to say that, so in this scenario, somebody is making decisions based on lots of information. They're anticipating, hopefully, that the product will, or the insurance coverage will last for the duration of their need. Mm-hmm. And when that's not the case, and individuals have taken personal responsibility and planned for the future, it does seem that, and I'm really addressing my fellow commissioners, that at some point, there would need to be some type of backstop, that people that are taking responsibility for their future needs and yet run into some catastrophic type of experience shouldn't then have to just impoverish themselves just to find Medicaid. They should be able to have some type of access to a benefit that would allow them to continue to live the rest of their life without having to impoverish themselves to spend down to Medicaid.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of technical questions just to start off with. Mr. Kent, you had talked about removing the HSA contribution cap, the statutory cap on contributions to the HSA. Am I correct in believing that there is also a further, and it might be a regulatory as opposed to a statutory cap, on the amount that individuals can take from their HSA to pay for long-term care insurance premiums? And if so, I'm presuming that you would want that raised or eliminated entirely, correct?
To your second question, yes, but to your first question, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if there is a cap on the amount of the HSA that could be used to pay long-term care insurance premiums. I'm not aware of that. Maybe somebody else here is.
Okay. Second question, Mr. Grabowski, your reinsurance proposal, I just want to be clear, that does not involve the use of federal dollars as a backstop, correct? Because
Right.
there would be an incentive potentially to try to seed risks or anything else like that if you get into that, correct?
Absolutely. You could run it as a mixed public-private pool, but these have been constructed in different ways. We have a lot of good examples out there, as I mentioned, earthquake and flood reinsurance. We can look at what's worked and what hasn't worked. I acknowledge this is a very different market with very different risks, but reinsurance would actually get at some of the issues Mr. Claypool just brought up about these, high spenders, and what do we do about these, and why don't sellers want to offer more generous policies? Well, part of this is one of the reasons they put in all these policy constraints is that they don't want to bear the risk, and reinsurance is one way to kind of help spread that risk out.
Of course, the other problem is it could turn into something similar to the flood insurance program, which does have its own solvency problems in terms of federal.
Absolutely.
That's what I was getting at.
Fair enough.
One question, and Mr. Grabowski, you mentioned it, I think Mr. Kent, and we've heard it actually in our first panel a month or so ago. Do we know what drives purchasers or non-purchasers of insurance? Is it based on income levels, asset levels, or a combination of two? Do we know which one is the primary driver?
Well, I think they're linked, but certainly assets are a key indicator of whether or not somebody will buy.
Okay, but we don't know in terms of more or less or one versus the
I
other.
like to look at lifetime wealth. I think looking at kind of income at a single point in time, I really think in order to understand kind of the dynamics here, you really want to look at lifetime wealth and think about this. I think a point in time that you can definitely have liquidity constraints at different points, and there are different ways to construct the sort of stream of premiums as people age, but lifetime wealth is what I think is key here.
Okay. And then one other question. I think, Mr. Grabowski, you talked about life insurance versus long-term care insurance and complexities of the two. And my kind of thought responding to that is life insurance any less complicated than long-term care insurance, or is it even more complicated than long-term care insurance? And if so, is it the complexity that is driving the lower take-up rates for long-term care insurance, or is it lack of knowledge or some of the other characteristics?
So I didn't touch on life insurance, but I think, but I'll speak to that. I think absolutely, that just the whole way that we've sold these two policies, long-term care insurance is incredibly complex.
More so than life insurance, you think?
I think so. I think there's just more variables here. Think about everything we have. We have a daily benefit. We have a deductible. We have inflation protection. We have a potential max here. I mean, we could go on here. There are non-forfeiture benefits. I mean, there are a lot of different dimensions to these policies, and I think consumers' heads start spinning when they hear all these different features of these policies. I don't know, Jason, if you want to think about life insurance as well compared to...
Yeah, I just agree with that. It seems like it's a lot more complicated. There are a lot more variables that would, even affect your risk of needing it. And
Right.
Yeah, I would agree that long-term care as a product set is more complex than life insurance by comparison, but fundamentally different. Life insurance has a lot more data behind it, hundreds of years of mortality data.
It's more longevity and mortality tables as opposed to health.
It's a mature market.
It's a mature market. It is easier to price. There are more rating tables. It is almost always issued. There are fewer declinations, and there are mechanisms within the product that allow the insurer to adjust the return on that product real time, so they don't have to take the sort of rate increases that have plagued the long-term care insurance business.
A quick history lesson. In the early years of the life insurance market, they excluded risk, much like the long-term care insurance market does today by medical underwriting. They eventually figured out how to price that risk, and there's not the medical underwriting. Long-term care insurance has never gotten over that hump, and we continue to exclude about 20% of the market through medical underwriting. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Thank you, and thank all of you as well. My first question goes to Mr. Grabowski. You talked about targeted subsidies. Could you go into a little bit more detail as to what we currently have by way of subsidies, and as I understand it, what you're recommending by way of substitute?
Absolutely. So there's a series of vehicles. I put that up. In the interest of time, I moved through it relatively quickly, so I appreciate the opportunity to return to it. We have a series of deductions in our tax code. First, different states have their own deductions and credits that they offer, and that's on a state-by-state basis. And it's estimated that about 600,000 individuals benefit from those deductions and credits at about $1.1 billion per year. Also, individuals who itemize their medical expenses are able to take a deduction. We think a lot of individuals are able to deduct their long-term care insurance premiums. And so that's 2.6 million individuals at 1.4 billion. And then finally, there's also a a deduction there for those individuals that are self-employed with long-term care insurance. So due to the age caps of how much you can deduct here, coupled with the fact that the marginal tax rate is different for a wealthier individual than a less wealthy individual, it turns out that a lot of those subsidies go to, more of those subsidies, I should say, go to older individuals and wealthier individuals. And so the idea here is simply to reorient or retarget those subsidies away from those wealthier, older individuals towards those middle-age, middle-wealth individuals.
And you would do that by?
Changing the tax code. And you know, you could say good luck with that, but I think it's details, right? Details.
Right.
Obviously, I think there's an idea everyone can get behind. We're not asking for more subsidies here. We're asking to put them towards a group that would actually, I think, better protect the Medicaid program. And so, but obviously, I'm not one of those individuals currently enjoying those subsidies. They may have a different opinion.
Thank you.
Sure.
My second question is for Ms. Burns, and I think for Mr. Kent, but if you all, please join in if I'm selecting the wrong people, or if you have something to add. And my question is the role of the states. As I understand it, the states have considerable input into oversight of insurance companies within their states. So I'm wondering how their current roles are involved with long-term care insurance, what you might see as changes in those roles.
Well, I'll take that one. States regulate insurance. So, and no two states do exactly the same thing. The NAIC produces model regulations, model acts that guide states, and some states will adopt those regulations or those model acts in whole or in part. With long-term care insurance, the federal government set a federal floor through HIPAA when they created the tax-qualified policies, because they required that for a policy to be a tax-qualified policy, it had to meet certain standards in the NAIC Act and regulation. And that, for the very first time, set a regulatory standard across the country. States then could, if they wished, build on those standards, and some did, but at least we had a common regulatory floor across the country. So states do regulate the products, and in regards to life insurance, I just wanted to make a point about life insurance and long-term care. Long-term care in a life insurance policy is simply paying out the death benefit early. But the trigger for that is the same as it is for a long-term care policy, and depending on the product, may even have some of the same requirements. So the appeal of a life long-term care product for younger people who don't believe that they will ever need long-term care is that it's a 2-for-1. So they see that no matter what, somebody's going to get something for the premium that they're paying. But they do have some of the same complexities attached to them, and in some cases more complexity than a freestanding long-term care insurance policy.
Mr. Kent, can you just respond very quickly, too?
Yeah, two important roles for states today: approving products and approving rate increases. And with the Interstate Compact, you can get a lot of states approval, about 30 some with a long-term care new filing, but you still have to go to each state individually to get a rate increase. That's one of their primary roles today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all very much for your comments. Dr. Grabowski, I have a quick question. And David and I had spoken about long-term care insurance for a long time. When you did all that, and I found this very interesting, but when you did this, did you look at types of benefits that you'd recommend be bought or premium structures or anything like that?
Do you mean actually in terms of that Medigap-like market?
Yeah.
What would these buckets look like? And I think, obviously having a high deductible plan is really important, I think, in there. We may run into some state insurance issues, state regulatory issues there, but that's something that would need to be addressed. But I like that a lot. I I think you have to have inflation protection, or otherwise these policies are fairly meaningless. Obviously, having kind of higher lifetime benefits, that means more expensive policies, but I think the more protection here, that maybe not for all consumers, but that's where maybe we can use kind of some behavioral economics tools to kind of nudge people into particular policies that may fit their sort of profile really well. And I find that really appealing as well, that given it's an electronic market, can we match kind of attributes of the individuals with particular policies that might fit their kind of risk profile? That's really appealing to me.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I would agree with David's comments. I would just add that also with regard to premiums and inflation protection, both could be indexed in a more real-time way than they are today. The current regulation in HIPAA requires insurers to offer 5% compound inflation, and that required offer resulted in a lot of policies having that rider attached to it. But there's a much more effective way to index benefits over time, and you can do the same thing with premium, which would reduce the initial cost.
One of the great failures in this market, sorry to jump in again, is just this flat premiums that we started with, and these huge increases that have had to occur. I know it was done to simplify this product, but it's led to these rate increases. We should have indexed this from the beginning to inflation and cleaned this market up. It's just I realize I've been saying to simplify everything, and here I'm making it more complex, but I think it actually backfired in a big way.
Yeah, having worked in the skilled nursing and post-acute area for a long time, I would get constantly approached by people who would ask, should I buy long-term care insurance? And I've been historically a big skeptic, because I don't think people really understood accessing the care and who was paying for it, essentially. So that rather than run the risk of increasing premiums and diminished benefits and escalation of cost and portability issues and everything else, my comment always was, why don't you just self-insure? Because as the population and the healthcare system has evolved, essentially Medicare was insuring your skilled nursing benefit for the highest probability of your utilization of skilled nursing services. I mean, if only so many people ever need more than 30 days of care. For home health, it's the same way. Medicare was essentially insuring for the home health care benefit for the vast majority of the care that you would likely ever need. And so you were left with insuring for what real purpose? Assisted living? Or, it always seemed and I could understand the confusion in the marketplace, because I was totally confused most of the time, And so it just seemed to me, why not just self-insure? What do you think about that, Ms. Byrne?
I think that's a difficult thing for people to understand, how much that may cost them over time and how they're going to access those benefits. Medicare pays when the care is skilled. It doesn't pay when it's not. And most of the home care that people are getting for this kind of a purpose is not skilled. And so that money comes out of their own pocket. Now,
yeah, I understand that, but again, the utilization patterns just never struck me as being an insurable.
All those barriers that we put up on the demand side also pertain to savings. People aren't forward-looking. They don't save their dollars. I mean, you're asking a lot of individuals. I know we're trying to get them to purchase this policy, but Americans haven't shown a strong propensity towards savings more broadly, and you're asking them to kind of put this money on the side and self-insure. I also wonder if that may be true for the sort of upper tercile, the wealth distribution. In that middle tercile, there's a group that's highly at risk that'll very quickly get into Medicaid, and I think that's the group we want to target here. That's the group that I'm from a policy perspective is key.
And which I appreciate your perspective on, and taking it from 10 to 20, that made a lot of sense to me.
A couple of just really quick questions, I hope. The first just being, and anyone can answer, just I'm a California resident now, and I sort of have just lived through all the upheaval around the CalPERS increase. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why such a drastic increase. So to the degree that you can, just briefly, can you just explain to the commission what are some of the key drivers behind some of the drastic price increases and rate increases that the insurers are asking for?
Yeah, I can take that one, having managed that program for a number of years. The most recent round, which is attributing to the 85% rate increase that Bonnie referenced, is really just a miss on their investment returns. The product was initially priced, and I think the last discount factor they had was over 7% built into the product. They're getting 3.5% or 4% on their invested assets, so you're way off. Their early product generations, however, did have some higher claims incidents. The first generation of products were offered on a lifetime basis without underwriting, and they got some claims immediately. So they corrected that in the first round of rate increases, but this more, like I said, this more recent round it's just a relationship between the number of policies in force and the investment returns that were anticipated on the premiums.
Great, thank you. And then, Mr. Brown, since no one's asking you any questions, I felt like I'd try to throw one at you. In our first commission hearing, we had a panelist, Mark Cohen, who really critiqued combination life annuity plans as sort of putting two complicated products together to create one very complicated product. And then today we hear Ms. Burns and Dr. Grabowski advocating and suggesting for a simplification. So how do you square those? How do you square those two things?
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with what Bonnie and David have said about the complication of the products. So, I mean, we are talking, though, about, this product is designed to sort of plan for retirement security. So all of the problems associated with the complexity of the long-term care insurance product still exist. So, I don't know that it's adding a lot more complexity, to bring together, that product and another kind of essential tool of, planning your income stream for retirement. So both need to be done. So I don't know that that having this combined product, in essence, makes it worse.
Great.
But actually, I did have one sort of question, talking about the inflation indexed premiums. My understanding is that, so CalPERS did not, I just didn't want this to sort of pass. I mean, if premiums were inflation indexed, that would not have stopped the increase in premiums, right? So it wasn't a misunderstanding of premiums, of inflation that led to the premium increase. So they did not overestimate?
No, they did not.
Okay.
Great. And then, Mr. Grabowski, you suggested, and I understand that you suggested, and I could have a wrong understanding. I understand that you suggested that by implementing all 5 of the suggestions that you presented, that we might move the needle from 10% covered lives to 20% covered lives, leaving another 80% of Americans uncovered. What
uncovered by private insurance.
Uncovered by private insurance.
Right.
What would you suggest? What would you suggest for moving on the rest of those 80? And if this is just, your suggestions, as monumental a feat of changing the tax code is going to be, only moves at 10, like what is the game changer?
Right. And I think Mr. Claypool touched on this earlier. I think mandatory solves everything. I think you can go to a universal plan. I took that off the table. There's obviously enthusiasm for that idea in certain groups. I just don't see that happening. But I think that's in the short term. But I think that's where you'd have to go, because I think it's a lot of heavy lifting to get to that 10%. Yeah,
I would just add quickly, increase interest rates by about 200 basis points, and you'll get a lot more supply in the market.
Hear, hear.
Commissioner Vandenberg.
I join my colleagues in thanking you for your testimony. What's striking about this panel is that all of you are making a variety of recommendations, except for Ms. Bird, a variety of recommendations about how to improve a product in the private market. So essentially, we're sitting here saying, gee, should we simplify the product? Should we make combination products? How can we change the parameters of these products? Doesn't seem to be a long-term commissioner's job to advising Congress about what the private sector ought to do. Is this an industry that is immature and maturing, or is this an industry that really doesn't have a business model that's going to work? So I'll ask David the question.
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I think it is a mature market, but I think it's one with a lot of market failures, and I think on both the demand and the supply side. And I think both on the consumer side in terms of, their perception of risk and their information and all that list, plus the distortionary effects from Medicaid, there's some challenging issues in terms of the purchase of these policies. On the supply side, same thing. There's these series of challenges, and so I think it's those market failures, those distortions that require intervention. I agree with you. I'm an economist. I like unregulated markets, but I think this is a market that, in order to, if left to its own, is just going to kind of wither there on the vine. We need to grow this market, and I think putting in place standardization, that's not a dramatic regulation, but I think it's one. I think it's very straightforward. But as Bonnie said, consumers are incredibly confused by this product. Even those that buy it are confused at what they actually have in their hand, and so we need to kind of clean up this market and kind of regulate it in terms of how firms compete. I think you could see some gains here. It's not dramatic regulations, but things that allow us to compare apples with apples, for example, in terms of policies. That's a very simple.
But most industry, a lot of industries have a lot of either uniform acts or industry standardization and self-correct. Why not here? Why hasn't it happened here? There are uniform state laws. There are certainly industry associations that could suggest parameters to simplify products and product categories and not be anti-competitive. So you wonder, why isn't this market self-correcting?
And there are some good examples.
The question whether or not there's a market here.
There's a market here, and I think you're pushing in the right direction. But I'll point to the Minnesota example. I'll point to CalPERS. Those have penetration rates 15-20%. Those are huge relative to sort of national averages in terms of sales. I think when you do offer a standardized market, when you do kind of correct some of the problems we put up, you actually can see some returns here. And so I think we do have some data points. Back to Mrs. Butler's question about going from 10 to 20%. I'm basing that on the experience in Minnesota and CalPERS, and both of those programs have some issues. The rate increases and so forth. They're not perfect, but I do think there's some data points suggesting that we can move the needle here.
Let me ask, because the question, I think I was going to ask the same question as my Stephen asked about to whether or not self-insurance or savings plans is not, if we want to put in a heavy lift in terms of trying to encourage American families to provide more financial wherewithal for the possibility of long-term care in their retirement. Whether going at savings isn't a proposition. So this is a fact question. How are 529 education plans doing? Are they widely used? I mean, is there a significant amount of assets going into them? Are family savings plans for disability and long-term care a conceivable avenue that might encourage you to get to that middle tercile in a more effective way if we provided some tax incentives for savings plans or for family savings plans, so it's not the individual who is going to have the long-term care problem. It is the family who knows to a moral certainty that some member of that family is going to have a long-term care problem, that we might encourage more joint and family or community-based savings mechanisms for rather than trying to, as you say, shore up or clean up, which the government doesn't do very well, clean up a marketplace in long-term care insurance.
I like that avenue as well in terms of encouraging. It could even be tax advantage savings accounts. I don't know. Consumers may not understand that. We'd have to do some education, but I think that's another kind of potential lever here. It's a different way to get at this. But
is there any constraint on using IRA, your 401ks for long-term care issues?
It would not be a qualified distribution.
right now. Today.
Well, here's our main savings vehicle in the United States, and we're not allowing a
That was in my remarks as a primary point.
I endorse it.
Sign us up.
Thank you.
Building on what George was just addressing, I also have been pondering how we could deal with what you all have talked about. And David, you captured in sort of misinformation, misperception, mistrust, combined with denial. Yeah, right. And how could we, I mean, I know I have fire insurance, I have automobile insurance, I have flood insurance, I have home theft insurance. Mm-hmm. All our life insurance, right? Right. The last one is a likely need, but the others are probably not. Sure. But I nonetheless I'm spending money and acquiring all those insurances. So I was trying to get your sense of what would enable us to change the equation here and have people recognize this as a real need. And maybe enlarge it to a family policy, that it just doesn't involve you, that it involves your entire family, and not being a burden and releasing your child. Right. So I'd just like your thoughts on how we might tackle that.
Yeah, I think I really like where you're going with that and sort of changing the dynamic here, because I think when you talk to middle-aged individuals, they have a lot of different types of insurance. They're saving for a lot of different, their college, kids' college fund and so forth. Long-term care isn't on their radar screen, and given the multi-generational nature of this purchase, where in many ways you're kind of helping the next generation. I have 3 daughters myself, and they probably would like me to go out and get long-term care insurance, so release the burden on them potentially. But I agree, like trying to make this a family, either savings device. There's something that can be done here. I don't know if they're.
Well, until you got to life insurance, there's something really profound missing. You cannot borrow money to buy a home unless you have homeowners insurance. There's a mandate. You can't license a car or register a car and be able to drive it without auto insurance. So, I mean, what is the equivalent there, or the parallel in the long-term care world? Well, we all have Medicaid as a backstop. So if you were prohibited from accessing Medicaid unless you insured or tried to insure, that would be a sort of an opt-in, if you will. But that doesn't exist today. So anybody can defer this decision and transfer assets or not, and eventually go on Medicaid. But there's no mandate. So if you want to get to that level, why do people own homeowners insurance or flood insurance? Well, they're compelled to do so if they want to live there.
Right. So there's no stick and
That's
not
right.
enough carrots, right? And then my other question, I was sort of intrigued with the idea of offering long-term care insurance through Medicare Advantage plans. And I think I had read somewhere, and I think, Len, you pointed out, in Israel, 80% of the population, and my numbers are probably not accurate, but there was considerable uptake, and it is offered through the health plans.
Right.
And so I was wondering if you, in your schematic, do you expect Medicare Advantage plans themselves to become long-term care insurers and change the nature of the industry?
Well, to me, that's the one thing that's always been missing from the world of private long-term care insurance, is that the commercial health players are not in it. Some have been in and out. Aetna has been in and out. Humana has been in and out. United has been in and out a few times, but they're not there today. But those companies are all bidding on these duals initiatives. And in those initiatives, they are assuming the total healthcare outcome for the people that are going to be in their population. So those are Medicaid and Medicare eligible people. They are scrambling to figure out how to manage the home care piece of that, the custodial, the non-clinical piece of that. That really is the opportunity. And I think to get to your question earlier, is this market broken? Yes. Can it be fixed? Yes. But that really is part of the equation, in my opinion, is we're going to learn a lot from these duals initiatives, but that's a subset of the population. It's 9 million people. Let's take what we learned from those 9 million people about managing the acute all the way to the end, to the subacute, the post-acute, the chronic, and all the way back, and then apply that in a commercial setting. And that's where the Medicare Advantage players can make a difference if they participate.
Thank you.
So the two questions, the first to David. Well, first, let me thank all of you for a really great set of presentations. I want to build on LaFonza and then George's question, so we're a commission that's been asked to think about long-term care overall as a system, and it's a 20-odd-year-old industry, and I'm hearing there's things that we could recommend that would be helpful. I'm also hearing that there's a few combination products out there, and I'll be honest, as somebody who doesn't own long-term care insurance, but maybe I should. Bonnie, I'm one of those sort of naive people who might come see you and say, so now what do I do? I don't get it. I don't see the creativity in the industry. I don't see these products being pushed. I don't see them being developed. And I'm sort of wondering why we as a commission need to own that burden. Like, where actually is the industry on developing and marketing and doing this stuff? I get that there's stuff that we could do to be helpful, but I'm sort of wondering where they are.
Yeah, I think the industry has been shrinking, as you probably heard. It's going in the wrong direction here, and we typically frame some of the problems with this industry as a demand problem. There's also a supply problem. They're unwilling to sell for a lot of those reasons we had up earlier. So I think the reason you should be concerned about this market is that a lot of individuals in that sort of near kind of Medicaid status come into Medicaid, and I think they spend down, if you look at their lifetime wealth, not their wealth at time of retirement, but their lifetime wealth. So I think there's a lot of gains if we can target that right appropriate group of individuals to buy long-term care insurance. I believe not just there's gains for those individuals, but I think there's a gain to the Medicaid program. And that intersection, I know you're going to have a whole panel on this in a little while. That's why you want to care about this market. You don't just want to let it wither on the vine here and die.
So fair enough, but let me push this further. Sure. So, if you assume that there's a tercile of folks who are likely just to use Medicaid because they're never going to be in a place where it makes sense. It's not about discretionary income, it's just about basically surviving. So you have a body of folks who are likely, if they have a need, to ultimately use Medicaid, and maybe the upper tercile is in a place where they ultimately could buy current products or self-insure through savings or whatever the case may be. So you're talking about sort of that middle tercile, trying to help them have a set of tools that make sense. And I guess my question, so let me ask it again, is I don't see where the industry is in delivering products that make sense. I get that the industry is shrinking, but if we were to make a series of recommendations that would actually try to foster that market, is the market going to step up? Are the products really there? Are we trying to save a market that isn't going to exist? I think
if you protect the sellers, in some ways, once again, using the Medigap market, if we have a benefit A and that has, inflation protection and a 90-day deductible and a set of common features that we know, and they can compete on those set of features, and consumers know what they're getting when they purchase that, I think the industry would step up to that. I think some of the uncertainty on the part of the industry has led, the risk is just too great, and so I think they've stepped back and said, we'd rather sell other products and not this one. So I think there would be a response there. I'd be curious to hear others here.
So I want to ask, I
sure.
use my time. So 40 seconds to you and 40 seconds to Lane. I want you to describe for me what that Medigap product looks like, and Lane, I want you to describe for me what it is that a health plan would offer an MA. 40 seconds each.
Sure. So for the Medigap product, you're going to have a Plan A that potentially has a set of common features. So maybe that's got let's say a lifetime max. I'll make this a very generous policy, a 90-day deductible. It's got a $250 a day in current terms daily benefit that's inflation protected. I'm probably forgetting, you can use nursing home care, assisted living, home health care, the whole range of different services. And so you can think about that being a Cadillac policy all the way down to Plan H that has a high deductible and maybe looks less generous but a much lower premium.
Yeah, I'd like to see Medicare Advantage suppliers offer a transition in a post-acute environment by a nurse practitioner overseen by a doctor for a 30, 60, 90-day period to reduce hospital readmissions, and then custodial home care for an extended period of time to make sure that they are resituated in home and being managed appropriately.
Are other two speakers anything to add, since I have 19 whole seconds?
He's good.
I'm not sure you could standardize them in quite that way. Some elements you could, but people have different affordability issues, so some people could pay more per day than others. Some people could not pay for a policy that paid longer than 2 years. Some could pay for a policy that paid for a lifetime. So I think, when you're looking at those kinds of benefits, that those are the things that don't lend themselves to the standardization.
And if I could just quickly, that's why I think you have different options and you allow individuals to select sort of much like Medigap, where you can protect for different gaps in the Medicare program, and some are very comprehensive and some are less so.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, in your comments for the life annuity product, which I'm very intrigued by, do you see modifications that could be made to make it more attractive to low and moderate income individuals, or do you believe that it's attractive to those individuals as it stands?
Well, as others have mentioned, the Medicaid crowd-out is very sort of relevant here, and in order to afford both an annuity and sort of a comprehensive long-term care insurance policy, you need considerable assets, and so I would, I think what we've modeled. The policy that we modeled, I think, would pay $1,000 a month, inflation indexed. And in the event of disability, $3,000 a month, and severe disability, $5,000 a month. And that would cost about, as a lump sum, about $200,000. So for a 65-year-old. So that I imagine that would be out of reach for a number of low and moderate income people.
Thank you. And Mr. Kent, you also mentioned that the fact of asset transfer, which is the issue that we've talked to in a number of panels. Do you have any theories of why specifically the partnership programs with the states have not been as successful as one would hope? Is it the same factors that we're discussing for all of long-term care insurance, or is there other factors that may contribute besides the crowd out?
Yeah, I guess there's two different ways to think about partnership. There's the 4 original partnership states, and then there's the partnership states per the national partnership regulations. And I think penetration, if you looked at new long-term care insurance sales over the last 4 or 5 years, you would see that there's actually quite a few partnership qualified policies that have been issued. Of course, that is a function of the inflation benefit that was attached to those policies when they were sold. But those products, like the rest of the long-term care market, suffer from lack of supply and some rigid regulations. The inflation protection requirements on the national partnership products make it very expensive. You have to buy 5% compound inflation if you're under, I think, the age of 65, and then there's a corridor from 65 to 74. Where it can be indexed, and then you can opt not to have it after age 74. So the products still are expensive with those constraints.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Grabowski, you mentioned that by having exchanges, and I think Mr. Kent mentioned similar comments, that you could have up to a 35% savings. And I believe you mentioned specifically that would be due to the reduction in the sales cost of the products. Would there be any underwriting concerns? And what I mean by that is, depending on the state for the exchanges, some say that there's savings, and others say that there's hundreds of % increase due to the exchanges on the individual rates. How would you avoid that problem or thoughts that may be a problem?
I don't think the exchanges get around the underwriting. They're sort of separate issues. I think, at least as I frame the exchanges, I think they could. There are examples of that if it was done in the context of a particular employer. Like many employers don't underwrite. If you join at time of and when you join the firm, for example, you would have the opportunity to enroll without any underwriting. So there's an example of kind of using an exchange and no underwriting. But I think, at least as I was putting forward an exchange, it was much more just around standardization and simplification, not addressing the underwriting problem, which is a big problem in this market.
Sure, and when you moved forward and talked about the employer offering, mm-hmm. Are you thinking individual ratings, or would that be a group rating?
Oh, absolutely, group. And you're offering this on a group market. You get around a lot of the problems that we have on that individual market, and so you're eliminating the brokers. Some of the selling costs go down. I think, it's a much different marketplace. It still can be very complex. The employer can be a filter and kind of help to explain this product. But I think there are real advantages to doing this at the employer level. And I think we've had some really good examples, once again, in Minnesota and California, of an employer kind of really getting a lot of, getting high enrollment.
And when the employer offers it, you aren't suggesting that the employer would pay for it. It would be simply a offered benefit that the employer does, basically the market research.
Correct. That they mandate that this be a benefit. You're going further with this to suggest that tax treatment of it and other issues, or that the employer shares it. I'm simply that employers offer a plan and getting around some of the risk issues around adverse selection and some of the load factors on an individual policy.
Okay, thank you.
So we've had a lot of discussion of the complexity and the number of issues that need to be addressed to create or to address market failures, as you described it, David. But I'm going back to your initial testimony. You talked, when you went down your list, you said that you talked about an electronic market and you talked about a high deductible policy. And if you then said if there were one thing you could do this. And it kind of surprised me, because I would think that if that were the one thing you did, you'd still be left with all the value, reliability problems that Bonnie so eloquently laid out. So you really think it's the one thing we should do?
Not the only thing. I said the first.
You said the one thing, but that's
one thing. Okay.
Walk back.
No. First thing, and I think because it's low-hanging fruit, Judy, relative to some of the other things I put forward. Changing the tax code is very complicated. It strikes me that standardizing this market may be complicated too, but maybe I'm being naive. But I think that's actually very doable. After that, then I think the reinsurance, the employers, those are the next two steps. I think the blending of health and long-term care insurance and changing the tax code, kind of retargeting those subsidies, those are the fourth and fifth things I would do. Not sort of in order of importance or what I think, sort of the gains would be there, but just kind of political feasibility. I think first and foremost, let's standardize this market. Let's allow consumers and sellers to know compare products and know what they're selling against.
Right. So I guess what I would say, without a full package, which remains to be defined in many ways or laid out, that the risk then is that you've improved or made more marketable a product that will have all the consequences that we've heard. So it strikes me as a bit of a gamble, to put it mildly.
To only do one and not continue to sort of fix some of the other attributes.
And to make it a priority, signals that this is where we're putting our efforts, as opposed to taking some of the measures to improve Medicaid we discussed this morning. I'm going to come back to your initial assumptions when I'm done. There was another I wanted to ask about. Mr. Kent, you went through the changes in the, not the changes in the tax code that David was talking about, but other changes in essentially tax benefits. And I wondered, there's a lot of concern, not only in the commission, but in the nation about public spending, and I wonder about, we spend a lot of money, as we now get attention to through the tax code, as well as indirect spending. And so, David, I wonder if you would comment on what income levels would be the primary beneficiaries of changing the cafeteria plans and raising the level of the HSA deductible and the other kinds of mechanisms that were described.
Yeah, it's, once again, we ideally want to hit that middle-age group. I think some of that we would hit the right age group. I wonder
the right age group.
Right age group, wrong potential income level.
Thank you. That's what I wanted you to say.
Yeah, no, I think, so that would be the concern there, I think, of targeting that kind of middle tercile that Bruce was pushing at.
Judy and I would prefer you call it the middle third.
Right. Sure.
May I include you in that, Judy? That's fine. So thank you for that. And I actually had a clarification on the tax benefits that you want to redirect from the higher income to the lower, to down the income scale. I was unclear. Would you take away the entire tax, the deductibility of your health spending for 50 plus? Was it, or just just the part that was going to long-term care.
The tax deductibility?
Yeah, but beyond the 7.5%, right? I mean, I thought you were taking away that whole benefit. So if a person has health expenses, they don't get this anymore. That's gone for them. Is that what you were doing to get that dollar amount?
I was just reorienting the long-term care part of that.
Just
So
the long-term
just
care.
the
That's what
long-term
I'd
care.
hoped.
Yeah.
That's the way I'd
Yeah.
understood it. I'd understood the last time. So it is time for me to go to your overall assumptions. And I wanted to tell you that, as you know, I've been working on getting everybody affordable health coverage since I was younger than you are. So it is a shame to me that you would give up on improving the safety net and improving and pursuing social insurance when you're so young, and we got to get working on it. So I hope you'll reconsider. I hope you'll reconsider that note.
Okay. I said, I did say I was giving up on it. I said it wasn't politically feasible. And the
Well,
next
that
10
sound,
Yeah,
that's
all right.
called mincing words.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
And a card carrying, I'm a card carrying political scientist. You're just an economist.
Just an economist, that's right.
Well, on that happy note, could we turn to
right.
Commissioner Stein?
And I'm neither. I'm just a card-carrying lawyer who represents Medicare beneficiaries. And my husband is a country doctor, and just this past week, he got this notice that looked to us like it came from the state of Connecticut, and Ken says to me, do I need to do anything about this? And when I look at it, I realize, oh, it's from somebody who wants to sell him long-term care insurance, but we have a partnership program, and so if we thought this was from the government, from the state, I'm sure it was intended to look. So that leads to this question. Starting with Bonnie, with regard to increasing consumer confidence, which I think if we want to encourage people to purchase long-term care insurance or other products, we have to do something about what may be the about consumer confidence in spending money and expecting that it'll be worthwhile. What would be, Bonnie, your key suggestions to increase consumer protection / confidence?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that one with this product. I mean, there was a serious backlash in the press when those letters went out, and there were about a year ago.
This just came this week.
But they mail them out periodically. And they come from the insurance companies that are selling the partnership products, and they're allowed to use the logos of the state.
Well, let me just, because of time, clarify I'm wondering, just generally, long-term care insurance and important consumer protection. So what should those be? Because I think I've been misunderstood. Thank you.
We do have to make those more, we have to make them work better for the people who have them. And that means both adding things to the existing rules. I would add things that give people more options when there are rate increases so that they can make some choices about whether to keep the policy or not. I would add some consumer protections that direct people more explicitly to the SHIPs, for instance, for counseling so that they can get some help with the selections that they make. There are tools that need to be developed to help people make decisions about whether this product is even a workable product for them in their current situation. And if it is, what type of a product, what kinds of benefits they need.
Do you see, or any of you, any reason we couldn't envision a time when if you had paid a certain amount of dollars or for a certain amount of time into a policy that it would be vested?
Yes, but I think that's a difficult issue with the companies about how that would work. And, you know, because insurance is regulated by the states,
yeah,
we have that barrier. Anything that gets incorporated into federal legislation, of course, and became a federal requirement, then would overcome that barrier.
Thank you. I want to thank David with regard particularly particularly to the goal to standardize and simplify. That I do understand, and having worked very much with Part D under Medicare when that did not happen and has not happened, and having worked personally and professionally with people trying to purchase long-term care insurance, I also agree with all of you, and particularly Lane has well expressed the difficulty in understanding and David comparing these policies. I wonder, Mr. Kent, if you could tell me why you're suggesting that long-term care policies be part of Medicare Advantage, which is more expensive to us taxpayers than traditional Medicare, and could you see it, if we were to go in that direction, as part of traditional Medicare? There's my question.
I think the chasm that exists between acute care and chronic care needs to be closed in any way that it can, because there is a snapback effect. People leave the acute care responsibility of the Medicare Advantage payer, and then they are not tended to, and then they have unnecessary readmissions. So there is cost embedded in the...
But that's true for traditional Medicare, right?
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that premise. We need to do something about the increasing number of people who live happily with long-term and chronic conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're getting Medicare under a private Medicare Advantage plan or a traditional plan.
Right, but linking chronic care and custodial care to acute care, I think, has benefits in both directions, and that really what is missing today. The carriers, the insurers that write the Medicare policies or the Medicare supplement fee for service or participate in the Medicare HMOs do not have any responsibility for the chronic care needs, and so they are largely neglected, and that adds cost to the system for both.
Well, they do have responsibilities. They may not meet them, but the law does provide for coverage for people who need skilled care, even if it's to manage, to care for a chronic condition.
It is for skilled care, correct. It is not for non-skilled custodial care. That's the piece that's missing.
Right, in Medicare. So I just didn't understand why you were going to Medicare Advantage, except that it's...
I was just using that as an example. It's exclusive to
okay.
Medicare Advantage.
I think that's important for us to understand, because
Thank you for clarifying.
I think, will be to figure out what vehicles might do what.
Understood.
Okay.
Although with the duals, I think managed care has been seen as a vehicle to do this management more readily, whether that's true or not, and the data don't always support that. But I think many states like Minnesota and others have gone into these managed care.
And Connecticut pulled out, so,
yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important clarification. I appreciate it. And then with regard to some comments from the other commissioners, are any of you suggesting that we consider the government, that the government should create incentives to have people purchase these private plans, or do you think that if they were really valuable, they would sell themselves?
And if we could get a quick answer to that, because this will be our last question and comment. Thank you.
I think we could, with some reorientation of this market, incentivize some additional individuals, especially those in that middle third of the distribution, to purchase policies. So I don't think these policies, if we allow this market to go on, will sell themselves. It's pretty obvious. We have 30 years of data suggesting they won't, and the market's going, I think right now, on the firm side, going in the wrong direction.
With that, I want to thank this panel for doing a wonderful job.
Thank you very much.
Helping us think through a specific and difficult area as we go through our deliberations. We're going to take a brief break so the commissioners can use the restrooms, check their phones. I'd like everybody back on their seats by 5 minutes of 3 for our last panel.
Fine. I only need to do one.
Thank you very much, everybody.
I don't have one, but I'll find one. Here. Okay.
Right. We have the strong in the audience with us. Those of you who've been kind enough to spend most of the day with us, if not all of the day. So we're up to our fourth panel. We've spent the day looking at ways to strengthen the two key public programs as well as the private insurance market. We're sort of, as a commission, we're sort of moving into the kind of the strengthening idea generation portion of our work for our very short time in existence. And for this last panel, what we wanted to do is to focus a bit on the interaction between public and private markets, because this is an area between public insurance. Okay, Bruce, between private insurance and public programs. There we go. Sort of the interaction between public and private. And we have four wonderful speakers with us, and since I don't know if you folks were here earlier, it's 10 minutes a speaker. I'll stop you at 10 minutes if you're not there. You can follow the red light, the lights, and the red light will tell you when we're at 10. 5 minutes of questions per commissioner. And with that, we'll start with Eric French. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for having me. Here's some thoughts on Medicaid insurance in old age. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the healthcare system in the United States, everyone here, I think, has a very good understanding of how both Medicare and Medicaid work, but I just want to give a few additional comments on terms of who actually benefits within the Medicaid program. So my comments will be mostly on Medicaid. Now, virtually everyone age 65 and plus in the United States is eligible for Medicare insurance, and Medicare pays for virtually 100% of certain service items, such as medium-length hospital stays and the like. However, for all practical purposes, Medicare does not pay for nursing homes. And so that puts individuals who don't have private long-term care insurance in the following situation. If they have relatively high financial resources, they'll wind up paying for these long-term stays out of pocket. Otherwise, they'll wind up on Medicaid, and an individual who initially is paying out of pocket can wind up being financially destitute after a relatively short stay in a nursing home, given the expense. And for that reason, 62% of all Medicaid payments towards the elderly are for nursing home expenses. Next slide, please. Just in terms of the Medicaid program, for the elderly, it is a program for those who not just meet the demographic criteria, being elderly or age 65 plus is one of those criteria, but also individuals who fit one of the two categories. Either they have relatively low income and assets. This is sometimes referred to as being categorically needy. And then the second is individuals who have relatively low assets and may have high income, but because they have catastrophic medical spending, they wind up being eligible for Medicaid. So this is often referred to as the medically needy program. Now, not all states actually have a formal medically needy program. However, every single state has some channel by which a person who is financially destitute through long-term care stay can wind up getting Medicaid benefits. Now, just in terms of the questions that I'm interested in understanding, I'm trying to understand to what extent do relatively richer people wind up on the Medicaid program because they do exhaust their financial resources and wind up in long-term care facilities. So, next slide, just in terms of specifically what I'm interested in, I'm interested in how big are these transfers that the elderly actually receive? How likely are they to wind up on Medicaid? And how big are these transfers to those who are at the top of the income distribution? Now, what we found is that actually those at the top of the income distribution receive a fair amount in the way of benefits. Rich people tend to live a long time, so they have more years to actually rack up Medicaid expenses. And furthermore, when relatively high-income individuals do wind up on the Medicaid program, they wind up spending a lot in the way of Medicaid resources. The reason for this is any time that an individual with relatively high income winds up on the Medicaid program, it's because of catastrophic medical spending. Because it's catastrophic medical spending, they can wind up with very large medical expenses for the Medicaid program. Next slide. Now, just in terms of the data that I'll be showing you, it's from two very large household-level data sets, Assets and Health Dynamics of the Oldest Old, and the Medicare Current Beneficiary Survey. I just want to show you some facts for retired individuals ages 70 and older, just singles, although we do also have some results for couples as well, but singles are a little bit easier to think about. And just in terms of the numbers that I wish to show you, it'll be broken down by income, where for the most part I'm defining income as annuity income coming from both defined benefit pension plans and also Social Security benefits. Now, next slide. Just in terms of my first point, rich people tend to live longer than poor people. So here's some facts from Assets and Health Dynamics of the Oldest Old. What it shows is life expectancy conditional on being age 70 for different groups of individuals. So for example, what you can see from the table is that for those at the 10th percentile of the income distribution, on average, they live about 10.2 years. If it's a low-income man in a nursing home, it's only 2.2 years, much higher if it's a woman who's in relatively good health. Those at the top of the income distribution, on the other hand, they tend to live 14.2 years on average. And so these relatively high-income individuals, they just have more years to wind up on the Medicaid program. Next slide, please. Now, just in terms of Medicaid recipiency rates, the next table shows the Medicaid recipiency rate both in Assets and Health Dynamics of the Oldest Old and also the Medicare Current Beneficiary Survey. The Medicare Current Beneficiary Survey data is probably a little bit more reliable because it's based upon administrative data. Now, in terms of what that survey shows is that 69.6% of all individuals at the bottom of the income distribution who are at least age 70 are receiving Medicaid benefits of some sort. Those at the top still have a 5.4% Medicaid recipiency rate. Now, just in terms of what I'd like to show you next, here are Medicaid payments conditional on income quintile. Now, for those at the bottom of the income distribution, what you can see is that on average, they receive $6,170 per year. Okay, so that's a fair amount of money. That's averaging over those who are Medicaid beneficiaries as well as those who are not Medicaid beneficiaries. And as we move towards the top of the income distribution, we can see that those at the top of the income distribution, they still receive on average $900 per year in the way of Medicaid benefits. Now, the right column shows out-of-pocket medical expenses, and so what you can see from the right column is that the amount that Medicaid actually pays towards the elderly, it's basically the same order of magnitude as what people spend out of their own pocket for health care in later age. Some other interesting facts: women tend to accrue more in the way of both Medicaid payments and also out-of-pocket medical spending. And of course, those in nursing homes are responsible for the majority of all Medicaid payments. Now, just in terms of those who are just on Medicaid, those who are Medicaid beneficiaries, amongst that set of individuals, those at the top of the income distribution receive the largest benefits. So what this shows is that for those at the bottom of the income distribution, Medicaid payments amongst Medicaid beneficiaries are $8,870. Amongst those at the top, they tend to be $16,670. So again, when relatively high-income individuals wind up receiving Medicaid benefits, they tend to receive quite a bit. The last slide that I have shows my effort to kind of put all these different facts together, accounting for the greater lifespan of relatively high-income individuals relative to low-income individuals and how much they get on average per year. The final slide shows how much in expected present discounted value different groups of individuals actually receive over their remaining lives. And this is evaluated from age 74. So what this shows is that conditional on being age 74, averaging over men and women, different health groups, those at the bottom of the permanent income distribution on average receive about $25,000 in expected present discounted value of Medicaid benefits over the remainder of their lives. Whereas those that, even at the top of the permanent income distribution, are receiving a full $4,300. And that concludes my statement.
Great. If we could hear from Jeffrey Brown from the University of Illinois next, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here. I've worked with or on various commissions and boards over the year, and I know it's a lot of work, and I know you're not doing it for the money. So I certainly appreciate your efforts to solve this very tough problem. My message today is in some ways a somewhat negative one, in that I'm going to underscore how incredibly difficult this problem is to solve. As I often tell my students, not all problems have solutions, and this is about as close to one that might meet that characteristic as any I've seen. What I thought I would do is, and by the way, you have a slide deck there. I'm not going to even try to get through it all. I provided some of that just so that you had some data and statistics. Happy to talk about it in the questions. But what I really want to focus on in the opening remarks is this idea of the interaction between Medicaid and the private market for long-term care. This is my views here today are based on research that I have done with Amy Finkelstein of MIT, although I don't hold her responsible for the way I characterize it today. Our research agenda really started by trying to understand why the market for private long-term care insurance was so small. Because if you sort of step back and you think about it, this is a risk that non-trivial chance that you're going to need it. Most people don't have the resources to provide it because there's a very long tail, meaning very small probability of really expensive events being in a nursing home for many years that can really financially devastate most of the income distribution. And yet people aren't buying it, and the question is why. So we went through a number of studies over a number of years, and I'm going to try to characterize those. That first we started off trying to look for evidence on what we call the supply side, just looking at what problems exist in the private market that might prevent these policies from being offered at good prices or might restrict the form of the policies may take. And while there is evidence of some of this, there are high loads and so forth, what we basically discovered is that at least for some subgroups of the population, there were policies that looked quite attractive, and yet in those subgroups of the population, people were not buying them at any greater clip than they were more generally. So for example, if you happen to be a reasonably healthy woman who, because of the gender-neutral pricing of the policies and so forth, they looked like these things were pretty darn close to actuarially fair, and yet women weren't really buying them in any greater proportions than men. So what we began to think about is, okay, we recognize there might be some problems in the market, but let's assume that there wasn't. Let's assume that we could somehow magically wash away any problems that existed in the supply of these products. It seemed to us that there was still something fundamentally affecting demand, that for some reason people just didn't want to buy this. Now, you can think of there being a whole host of reasons why people may not buy. It could be that they view family as a substitute for it. They might be concerned about insurers going bankrupt. They might just have mistaken beliefs about the need for the insurance. They could just be making a mistake, lots of things. And all of those may be true. Some of them we have a little bit of evidence on, a lot of them we don't, but people are now working on it. What we focused in on was the interaction with Medicaid. And the conclusion we came to, and I want to be careful how I state this because it's been mischaracterized by people on all sides of this debate, is that the existence of the current Medicaid program alone and the way it is structured by itself is sufficient to make private insurance look unattractive to all but the highest end of the wealth distribution. Now, I say it that way that by itself it is sufficient because we're not saying that it's the only thing going on. Not even really saying it's the primary thing going on. There may be other things that are restricting demand as well. But the point is that as long as we have a Medicaid system that is structured like the one today, that no matter what we do on tax subsidies or on prices or on helping people make better decisions, on improving their ability to optimize and so forth, if we have the existing Medicaid system in place, fundamentally most people are going to rationally find it in their interest to forego privately insuring against long-term care. And I want to take a minute or two to explain why that is. And we dubbed this the implicit tax, but I want to describe what that means because it's not a tax in the sense of a statutory tax. There are two features of the interaction between Medicaid and private insurance that lead to this issue. One is that, these are going to seem obvious, but they actually have pretty deep implications. One is that if I go out and buy a private insurance policy, and we'll come back to partnership programs and so forth later, but under a standard policy, if I go out and buy a policy, I'm less likely to qualify for Medicaid because I've now protected some of my assets and I'm now going to be less likely to qualify under the asset tests. The second thing is if I have a private policy, even if I do manage to qualify for Medicaid, I spin down to that point or whatever the case might be, once I'm on Medicaid, my private policy has to pay benefits before Medicaid comes in on top of it. And what the term for that is that Medicaid is a secondary payer and the private insurance has to pay first. The reason these two things together create such a big issue for the private market is that you can go through and roughly calculate under assumptions about how people are making these decisions and what their consumption is like and what kind of risk profile they face. And we can show that the vast majority of the benefits that they are paying for when they buy a private policy end up simply substituting for or cannibalizing benefits they would have gotten from the Medicaid program. And therefore, the net benefit to the individual of buying insurance is very small relative to the real cost that it provides the insurer to provide the insurance. Because the insurer has to pay out, and they might be paying out even if those are benefits you could have otherwise had paid for by Medicaid, but it's still real money out of their pocket. But to you, it's not really of any incremental benefit if you're at a point where Medicaid would have been paying anyway. And the easiest way to understand this, imagine that you'd be perfectly happy to go out and spend $35,000 on a new vehicle. But the only way I'm going to let you do that is if I'm going to take away your $20,000 used car and not give you anything for it in return. You might find it valuable to get a brand new car at a price of $35,000, but not if you also have to give up a $20,000 thing that's worthwhile. And that's essentially what we're asking people to do. If you go out and you buy private insurance, you have to give up those benefits that Medicaid would have provided in the absence. And we find that this by itself, even if everything else was functioning well in the market, is sufficient to crowd out somewhere between 2/3 and 90% of the market for private insurance. I have a slide in here that kind of calculates the implicit tax kind of on average for different points in the wealth distribution, and you can see that even at the median of the wealth distribution, this implicit tax is well over half of the value of a private policy. Now, what can we do about it? I wish I had an easy answer to this question. I've been asked this more than any other question since we did this research, and the problem is there's just not an easy way around this. Some have said, well, sounds like the solution is we just have to eliminate Medicaid. Well, okay, you could. I don't think that's realistic or desirable. Plus, you have to assume that in the absence of Medicaid, there would be some other payer of last resort that might come in to play that role, and in which case you might have some of the same problems. At the other extreme, you could say, well, this just shows that the private market can't possibly work, and therefore we just need to socialize all the costs and fold this into the Medicare system. But I'm sure you don't need me to remind you about the long-term fiscal situation that we face. Unfortunately, though, this means that a lot of the proposals that are put forward to help encourage the private market, whether they're tax subsidies, whether it's the partnership programs, what have you, while they can help, oftentimes they they end up only operating on one of the two underlying causes of this implicit tax. And all of our work has shown that if you only solve one of the two problems, so you solve, maybe you ignore the insurance for eligibility reasons, but you keep Medicaid as a secondary payer, which is essentially what the partnership programs do, it turns out that it actually has a very small effect. It might grow the market, but the market is so small, if we went from 10% of people buying to 15% of people buying, that's a 50% increase in the number of people insured, but it's a trivial change in the number of uninsured. And so I've only got a few seconds left. I told you that this was going to be a somewhat pessimistic overview. Given this fundamental trade-off, it becomes very, very difficult to think of a way to have a means-tested Medicaid program and have an active private market. And I'm happy to discuss that in more detail with you during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to, we'll now turn to Rich Johnson from the Urban Institute, please.
Opportunity to testify today about the income and wealth shortfalls for old Americans with disabilities and those receiving Medicaid-financed nursing home care. As you know, the prospect of becoming disabled and needing expensive long-term care is perhaps the most significant risk that older Americans face. We don't have a system in place to adequately finance these costs, and as a result, many long-term care recipients, especially those with extended nursing home stays, end up going on to Medicaid. The drawback, of course, is that those receiving Medicaid-financed care must turn over nearly all of their income and wealth to the program, and as the population ages and long-term care costs rise, there's increasing concern that Medicaid will create even more pressure on federal and state budgets. Now, as the focus on Medicaid intensifies, questions are growing about exactly who receives help from the program in later life. To what extent has the program morphed into a middle-class entitlement for nursing home care? How many people would otherwise end up on Medicaid when institutionalized care could be encouraged to save for their own long-term care needs, either by purchasing private insurance or investing in some type of individual account? So I've been examining the income and wealth trajectories of older adults who end up in nursing homes, and what I found, and the major point I want to make today, is that most older people who receive Medicaid-financed nursing home care have low incomes and very little wealth, not only while they're on the program, but importantly, at least a decade before they enter a nursing home. And these results suggest that efforts to promote individual saving for long-term care, while laudable on many counts, may not end up moving that many people off of Medicaid or saving the program that much money, because most users of Medicaid nursing home residents never had the means to save much. And I think these findings underscore the importance of Medicaid for some of the nation's most vulnerable citizens. So in my remaining time, what I'd like to do is just discuss some of these findings. They're from the same, partly from the same data set that Eric used, the Health and Retirement Study. And on the first chart, what you see is the distribution of per capita household income in 2010, and how that differs by disability status among adults ages 70 to 78 who were living in the community. So at the median, the 50th percentile, that's the middle bar there, those with no ADL limitations have about 50% more income than those who with 2 or more ADL limitations. And if we turn to the next slide, we see the differences in wealth, and those are even more stark, where those with no ADL limitations have nearly twice as much wealth, household wealth, as those with 2 or more ADL limitations. Now, there's nothing new here. Everyone knows that people with disabilities have less income and less wealth, but what's perhaps more surprising on the next slide is that we see that those who became disabled in later life also have lower incomes in their 50s before their disabilities began. So this chart shows the distribution of per capita household income in 1992 by their 210 disability status. And this is for adults who were ages 52 to 60 in 1992, when they did not have any ADL limitations and when they were not retired. And so if we just compare again per capita income at the 50th percentile, the median, you see that those with no ADL limitations in 2010 had 48% more income back in 1992 than those who developed 2 or more ADL limitations. And again, going to the next slide, we see that the wealth differences, again, are even more dramatic. So a typical adult who becomes disabled in their 70s have only 3/5 as much wealth as in their 50s as their counterparts who were disability-free throughout their mid-70s. And in fact, if you look at those with 2 or more ADL limitations in 2010, back in 1992, a quarter of them only had no more than $123,000 in total wealth. If we look at total non-housing wealth, which might be more relevant, on the next slide, we see that half of those who developed 2 or more ADL limitations, half of those folks had no more than $18,000 in their 50s back in 1992, and more than a quarter had no non-housing wealth whatsoever. Finally, I'd like to turn to results on Medicaid nursing home care. And so this chart shows the distribution of per capita household income in 1992 for adults ages 70 to 75 who were living in the community in 1993. And what we see is that for those who eventually used some Medicaid-financed nursing homes, half of them had per capita household income of no more than about $20,000. If you look at those who eventually go on to use nursing home care but don't go on to Medicaid, their median per capita income was about 25% more, it's about $26,000. Those who went on to a nursing home and those who never went on to a nursing home had incomes in the middle of about $21,500. These differences aren't dramatic. What's much more dramatic, though, is if we look at their wealth in 1993 and see how it differs depending on what happens to you in terms of nursing home entry and Medicaid use in your 70s. And here we see that for those who went into a nursing home, never went on Medicaid, they had about 4 times as much wealth back in 1992, so 1993, than those who went into a nursing home and eventually received Medicaid. And then those who never went on to a nursing home, had about 3 times as much wealth as those who went into a nursing home and eventually used nursing home care. This is mean household wealth. It's important, though, that we look at the full distribution of household wealth, not just the mean. The means are very skewed. So this next chart shows that half of people ages 70 to 75 who eventually enter Medicaid nursing homes held less than $50,000 in total household wealth. A quarter of them had less than $2,700 in total household wealth. Again, this is in 1993 before they went into the nursing home. If we look at non-housing wealth on the next chart, a similar situation. Things look just a little bit worse for those in Medicaid-financed nursing homes. Half of them have non-housing household wealth of no more than $8,000. Now, you might think part of this as well, these people are on the verge of entering into a nursing home. Maybe that's why these wealth holdings seem so low. So what we then did was just restrict the sample to people who didn't go into a nursing home until 2003 or later. So now we're comparing their wealth in 1993 and looking at how it varies depending on outcomes that happened 10 years later. We look at those who entered a nursing home and eventually went on to Medicaid financed nursing home care. Their median total household wealth was only $60,000 compared to $269,000. So dramatically more for those who entered that nursing home after 2003 but never went on to Medicaid. And a similar story if we look at Medicaid, we look at non-housing household wealth. There we see that half of people who eventually go on to receive Medicaid-financed nursing home care 10 years later, 10 or more years later, half of them had no more than $10,000 in non-housing household wealth back in 1993, compared to $122,000 for those who went into a nursing home but did not receive Medicaid, sorry. So I think in conclusion, these results point out a lot of the economic challenges, the financial challenges that people who eventually go on to Medicaid experience well before they ever enter a nursing home. And I think it raises some questions about how much money we could save by encouraging people to save more on their own, because many of the big users of Medicaid actually don't have much resources to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we'd like to hear from Ellen O'Brien, who's formerly from MacPac.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm pleased to be here to discuss the interaction of insurance, private resources, and Medicaid. You asked for comments on a number of topics related to private resources and Medicaid, the mismatch of needs and resources for long-term care among the elderly, which I think Rich has just hit out of the park, so I won't comment on that one. Asset transfers, Medicaid spend down, and the effect of Medicaid on savings and private insurance purchase. I will briefly comment on some of the available research on these topics. The bottom line conclusions are summarized on this first slide, but the gist of my remarks is that Medicaid's long-term care program overwhelmingly serves those who are poor or have very low incomes. Few of these individuals could afford private long-term care insurance, and the safety net serves a legitimate role for them. At least some middle and higher income elderly, where the income distribution we're talking about is the income distribution for older adults. Some of them receive Medicaid, but the numbers are relatively small, and there's little evidence that the availability of a Medicaid safety net has disincentivized savings for future long-term care needs or the purchase of private insurance. It's tremendously important to put the issue of Medicaid's purported disincentives in perspective. To start, I think it bears remembering that, one, there are sizable gaps in Medicaid's protections for long-term care. It provides limited access to care and exposes people to catastrophic expenses. And two, that most older adults have very modest incomes and assets. The typical retired American these days relies largely on Social Security. Older adults in the middle of the income distribution get 66% of their income from Social Security versus 9% from private pensions and just 5% from assets. Most of these middle-income elderly would be exposed to financially catastrophic costs if they needed long-term care. So the first thing to note about the interaction of private resources and Medicaid is that the overwhelming majority of individuals receiving Medicaid-financed long-term care lack the resources to pay for their care. There are several studies that document the limited income and assets of older adults who receive Medicaid assistance with long-term care costs. A handful are listed on this slide. These studies include, for example, one from the GAO in 2007 that examined Medicaid applications and the outcome of eligibility determinations associated with those applications. More than 90% of those applicants had non-housing assets of less than $30,000. 85% had annual incomes of $20,000 or less. Josh Wiener from RTI has a recent study for the SCAN Foundation on the spend-down population. He also shows that those people, a small proportion of people who end up on Medicaid nursing home care start out with limited resources and have even less when they transition to Medicaid. And my co-panelist, Rich, an earlier report he did, in addition to today's hot off the presses work, has also documented that people receiving Medicaid long-term care services are overwhelmingly low income and have very few assets. Just referring back to his earlier work, those with any Medicaid home care use, for example, were disproportionately at the bottom of the income and wealth distributions for their age group. 45% were in the bottom income quintile, where the median income in that quintile was roughly $11,000. Older adults who ever received Medicaid home care are also disproportionately in the bottom of the lifetime earnings distribution. Relatively few who ever received Medicaid long-term care earned enough in their working years to pay for care at older ages. 85% were in the bottom two quintiles of the household size adjusted lifetime earnings distribution. Only 2.7% were in the top quintile, where the average annual earnings in that top quintile were just $51,000. Over the working years. The findings are similar for older adults who received any Medicaid-financed nursing home care. 60% were in the bottom two quintiles of the lifetime earnings distribution. 8.2% were in the top quintile. So although some middle-income older adults eventually receive some assistance from Medicaid, and the percentages who do is small, Rich's earlier study doesn't shed light on how much they cost Medicaid. They may be mostly able to pay for their own care, and we can't conclude that they did not save for long-term care needs. People's income and assets at the time they need long-term care are the product of what they have earned and spent and saved during their working lives and during their early years of their retirement. By the time people need long-term care, there are many reasons why people have resources and others do not, including high health and long-term care spending. Other empirical studies by economist Frank Sloan and colleagues, for example, investigate whether the prospect of receiving a Medicaid subsidy for nursing home care affects savings by the elderly. Those authors found that Medicaid did not crowd out savings, measured by non-housing assets. The wealth holdings of the elderly declined over time, but that spending out of assets had little relationship to the likelihood of gaining eligibility for Medicaid. The authors also concluded that elderly who enter nursing homes spend down their assets with wealth declining $20,000 on average. I could cite other studies, but those I have reviewed find that there is a strong precautionary motive for savings. If they have enough income to do so, the elderly who expect to use long-term care continue to accumulate assets, they don't divest them. Related to this, and turning to concerns about asset transfers on the next slide, studies show that there is little basis for the assertion that people with substantial incomes or assets are becoming eligible for Medicaid by improperly transferring their assets. The structure of Medicaid, as we've heard, provides a pathway to eligibility for middle-income people, but only after they incur catastrophic expenses. The spend-down system has fueled concerns that people transfer their assets or shelter income in trusts to qualify for Medicaid. Medicaid thus includes rules to restrict eligibility for people who have transferred assets within a 5-year look-back period prior to application and limits how much income can be sheltered in trusts. The GAO has concluded that few older adults transfer assets before applying for Medicaid, and the amounts transferred are small. In their examination of 540 Medicaid applications, for example, they found that 10% of approved Medicaid applicants had transferred assets, and the median amount of those transfers was roughly $15,000. A number of those applicants, of course, incurred penalties, and their eligibility for Medicaid was limited. In his recent study, Josh Wiener reached a similar conclusion and found that older adults who spend down to Medicaid are less likely to make transfers to children and grandchildren than those who do not transition to Medicaid. Urban Institute researchers Tim Wademan and Corbin Liu also found few asset transfers, those that happened were small, and the nursing home population that never transitioned to Medicaid makes extensive and large transfers, in contrast to the population that does eventually receive Medicaid-financed nursing home care. When they attempted to quantify the total magnitude of the asset transfer problem, the researchers found that aggressive recovery of all cases of transferred assets would recover only 1% of Medicaid long-term care spending. Here, too, the magnitude of the problem is small. On the question of whether Medicaid crowds out private long-term care insurance, the research evidence is pretty thin. As Bonnie Burns and Jeff Brown and others have explained here today, there are a number of explanations for the low take-up of private insurance. Only a small share of older Americans have private long-term care insurance, and even among older adults in the top wealth quartile, only a quarter have it, hardly a group who could be said to be planning to rely on Medicaid. Jeff Brown's work is perhaps the most widely cited topic. When I say the evidence is thin, I think that in some of the work, it's a simulation model that's assumption-driven, and if you change the assumptions, you change the result. There are a few empirical, data-driven studies, but findings of those studies are mixed. A study by Frank Sloan and Ed Norton, for example, finds no effect of the availability and generosity of Medicaid on insurance take-up for adults in their 50s, and only very weak evidence that Medicaid affected insurance purchases of adults age 70 and older. To summarize, what I'm suggesting you take away from the research findings and what we know about the operation of the Medicaid program is that there may be some crowd out associated with Medicaid's long-term care safety net, but it's small. We shouldn't get too carried away by anecdotal reports that Medicaid is a middle-class entitlement or allows even the wealthy to easily shelter their assets. Most people who eventually received Medicaid long-term care had modest incomes to begin with and had very little by the time they needed long-term care. Asset transfers are inconsequential, and there's not a lot of interaction between Medicaid and private insurance or savings because there's little overlap between Medicaid's intended beneficiaries and the population that can purchase unsubsidized private long-term care insurance or self-insure. Although concerns about crowd out lead some to suggest that Medicaid eligibility needs to be tightened, further tightening Medicaid eligibility is unlikely to have a material impact on program spending or insurance purchases, but would make an already limited safety net even stingier and risks leaving the poor and low-income elderly with even more limited access to needed services and poorer quality of care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations. I'd like to begin to my left with Commissioner Stein.
Thank you very much. We started the day with Diane Rowland from Kaiser Family Foundation setting out her testimony, and one of the things that struck me was that she said that there was a myth, a couple of myths in the world that we're discussing here today, and one of them was that higher income people transfer large amounts of money to qualify for Medicaid, and that and the second myth was that Medicaid crowds out the field for people to purchase long-term care insurance. And as the day has gone on, we have had some dueling data regarding that, but largely not. So I wonder, I'll ask Ms. O'Brien first, since she waited to speak, and maybe others would want to chime in. Why does that myth persist, and how can we manage with it?
In part, the myth persists because of these anecdotal stories. Some people know about somebody transferring assets. It also persists because people misunderstand the size and the factors that account for the growth of the Medicaid program. People think that Medicaid expenditures are growing out of control, and this must be driven by middle-class elderly. But in terms of what to do about it, my preference would be to leave Medicaid as a foundation for means-tested assistance for the very low-income elderly, and add a social insurance program that could provide a foundation to which Medicaid would be a supplement for those at the bottom.
And with regard to your second point, because we have Medicaid, and I think we can try to understand it, can you give us some general outline of what if you were the queen of the world, what your second notion would look like?
What
this social insurance notion, the new idea.
Well, I appreciated Marilyn's point about Medicare. I could certainly see a program that expands on the Medicare program to provide modest long-term care benefits, perhaps with some means-tested assistance. I would prefer to see a social insurance program that includes, of course, children and non-elderly adults and the elderly. Beyond that, I haven't had a lot of time to think about all of the parameters involved.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Brown, do you have a sense of how we might synthesize the different approaches differently from what Ms. O'Brien suggested was the reason?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say that my report doesn't, my studies don't say anything about the spin-down question per se. In fact, the very fact that such a large fraction of expenditures are paid for out of pocket suggests that it must not be that easy to spend down to qualify. So we're not claiming that at all.
Okay.
Our story is nothing, there was nothing in my description about
the transfer
implicit tax
issue
that comes out from the transfer issue. That's
Thank
not
you.
where
So that's one of two myths that you're not suggesting exists.
The other one I suggest is not a myth, and in fact, I would say that the evidence that I've heard is not inconsistent with the fact that
the crowd out issue.
I think the crowd out issue is very real. And let me first address two misstatements. First of all, it's not true that you change the assumptions, you change the results, and I would encourage you to look at all the robustness checks in the back that go through pretty exhaustively in thinking through the different things, different quality of Medicaid and so forth, and you find that this general finding of a large crowd out effect is there. Second is Amy and I, as well as Norma Coe, who is now at the University of Washington, do have some empirical work. We obviously don't observe a world in which we don't have Medicaid, but we do observe state-by-state variation in the generosity of Medicaid. And for example, we do find that a $10,000 decrease in the amount of assets that one is allowed to keep to qualify increases coverage by about a percentage point, which is not large, but it does suggest there is an effect. But the bigger point, which I actually find the data and so forth that Rich and Ellen have presented very interesting and insightful, but again, I would say there's nothing at all inconsistent about saying that the majority of the people on Medicaid are low income, or that the majority of expenditures of the program accrue to low income people. That's to be expected.
And that's true.
That's true. That's not inconsistent with saying that the existence of Medicaid can crowd out demand from people higher up the distribution. But even if no one higher up the distribution has long-term care insurance, you'll still get that fact, because people with wealth have to spend through their own wealth before they become eligible for Medicaid. And so it's a mechanical effect that, of course, not many of them are going to be end up eligible. It's only going to be that very small percentage of people who, even conditional on entering long-term care, need it for long enough that they can exhaust, $100,000 or $200,000 worth of resources. And there aren't that many people in that world, but the fact that they can rely on that suggests that it eliminates the catastrophic tail. So, Ellen made the point that that people do have precautionary motives, and they do, and the fact that Medicaid is there as a way of taking care of you in that catastrophic case does dampen the demand for insurance. And I'm not saying we should get rid of Medicaid. I haven't made any statement about that. I'm just saying that I don't view anything inconsistent about that.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Vedder, please.
Ask you about something you said earlier, because there's lots of discussion about private insurance, public insurance, but also savings. And I am familiar with and have done work on the arguing that this is an insurable risk, and that's quite different. Buying insurance or insuring is quite different from doing your own savings, because, and I guess my view is that it's inefficient and ineffective to save because it's a catastrophic, unpredictable catastrophic risk, and I see you nodding, and would you say a little bit more about that?
I absolutely agree. I mean, anytime you have a risk that has a sort of a long tail of low probability of really catastrophic events, savings is a very inefficient way to deal with that. What motivated our research at the very beginning was the fact that long-term care, the nature of it is such that this looks exactly like the kind of thing that you want to insure against. And so it was puzzling that more people weren't doing it. So I completely agree with that.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Now with a little bit of disagreement, I'm thinking about some of my best friends are simulators, so that it's not, when Ellen says it changes with the assumptions, I've seen that a lot, and I'm glad yours are robust, but there's always an issue of simulation. But I have a question as you talk about the implicit tax. And what you lay out is logical, and I follow your argument. But my problem with it is, do you really think that people think this way? I mean, if you look at when we have heard in the previous panel about first of all, we know about people not thinking about the future, not knowing what their risks are. They look at the policies. As you yourself have said, in your work it says, there are lots of reasons people don't buy, and I understood and appreciated your clarification on what you are saying about Medicaid. But so let me just stick with my question. Do you really think people think this way?
Certainly not all. I have lots of work in other contexts talking about people making terrible optimization mistakes for all sorts of decisions. And so no, that's not. But again, as I said at the very beginning of my remarks, what we were showing in this paper is that even if you somehow manage to eliminate all the other things going on here, even if there were 1,000 insurers all competing and offering actuarially fair insurance, even if people were not subject to behavioral biases that might, or wrong beliefs about coverage, even if you could solve all those problems so that in the best world we really did have people that were behaving rationally, even in that world, people are not going to buy. We're not saying that this is the only reason by far. And in fact, one of the things it suggests is if you could solve the implicit tax problem, you might not move the needle a whole lot on if there are a whole bunch of other things that are constraining the market. And we've always tried to be very clear.
Exactly. No, I appreciate that. What you're saying, the other problems could do it by themselves as well, is what you're pretty much saying. The other limitations to the product, et cetera, right, to the reliability.
And other behavioral
And other behavioral issues. Thank you, I appreciate that. And what you're really, I think you're also saying, and I take issue with it not being a solvable problem, and you didn't quite say that at the beginning. It's certainly a tough one. But what you're really saying is if you believe in a safety net, and you do say you don't challenge the need for or validity of Medicaid, you got a problem. Make this market work. That's what you're saying.
That's correct. I mean, it's very, very difficult to come up with a world in which you have a means-tested safety net where Medicaid is a secondary payer and have a vibrant private market.
Appreciate that. So that's, again, in terms of relating different pieces of evidence, and I thought that Rich gave a very powerful statement on the limited resources of people who are using Medicaid, and pretty much everybody, I think Eric, yours too, it is primarily, and Ellen did it as well, it is primarily low-income, very low-income people who are using Medicaid, and you find a small proportion of what you called rich taking benefits. I wondered, I didn't see in your tables here the income range that you were looking at. I know you were looking at, 70-year-old plus or 74 plus singles. So what was rich? What was the top quintile?
Right. So amongst those who are rich, these would be people, I believe, those in the top quintile. I believe the median within them, it was, the threshold for being, quote, rich, it was a little bit under $40,000 per year for total income.
Right, that's, and I just think that we don't usually call that rich. So it seems to me that your findings are less inconsistent than we might have thought with the overall pattern of the very low levels of resources that people have who are using Medicaid. So thanks very much.
I fully agree.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm glad I was going to cut you off, but why would I? Thanks so much.
Commissioner Pruitt?
Thank you all. Throughout these panels, we've had some interesting discussions on asset transfers and varying opinions on the prevalence of asset transfer. And as an operator and provider of long-term and post-acute care services, it's my job to make sure our organization monitors our patients and make sure that they're safe at all times. And part of that is visitors that come in and out of our facilities. And many of them are lawyers that specialize in such activities. And just for fun, I Googled asset transfer and got 412,000 responses for Medicaid in Georgia. So I assume someone's looking at it out there. And Dr. O'Brien, my question for you, and in your category, I think I picked up on a word that you used, improper transfer of assets. There are legal and proper way to transfer assets. Has there been any research or look at that, or just know what amount have been legally transferred? I know that we mentioned the applications and the penalties, but have you looked at broader research?
Which is to say, legal by an asset that occurred before the look-back period, for example.
Or irrevocable trusts that were set up, et cetera.
Right. There is some research. Frank Sloan did some research looking at this argument that people sheltered their income in trusts, and he found, again, that the behavior was rare and that it really wasn't meaningful for Medicaid to invest a lot in administrative oversight on that process because they wouldn't find a lot in there. And, of course, states do have the right to recover from those trusts as well. In terms, I believe a number of these studies look at transfers prior to the studies that draw on the health and retirement study data, for example, look at an extended period of time. So they're looking back before somebody arrived at Medicaid, and so they do include those the amount of those legal transfers that may have occurred before the look-back period set in.
Well, I appreciate those comments. I think it would be interesting to conduct further research in that regard, because whether you classify assets as family assets, personal assets, there are ways around that. So I give that as my commentary. My second question, and Dr. Brown, is we didn't quite get through all of your slides, and one that I was particularly interested in was your thoughts of the thought experiment, and I don't have the exact title of the slide here, or the page, slide number, but where you talked about possibly providing a tax credit. Could you explain that in a little more detail to us?
I'd be happy to, but let me just be clear that this, the reason it's labeled thought experiment is that it's not necessarily an easily implementable policy. But if you go back to the two underlying causes for the Medicaid implicit tax, again, it's the fact that you you reduce your eligibility by protecting assets and then the secondary payer status. Implicitly, what you want to do is separate the insurance purchasing decision from Medicaid eligibility. You want to completely separate those if you don't want the private market to be affected by Medicaid. So the thought experiment is, if we could find a way to calculate for each individual what's sort of the expected present value of all the Medicaid expenditures that they would be foregoing if they bought private insurance, and essentially give that to them as a lump sum or as a way of, or over time, that you would then sort of compensate them for the foregone Medicaid benefit, and then if they were behaving rationally, subject to the constraint that maybe not everyone behaves that way, then you would eliminate that as a tax on Medicaid. The reason that's really hard to implement is the information requirements to really pull that off are quite high. So you have to know a lot about that individual, the probability that they're going to need care, that what their likely Medicaid expenditures would be in order to get that calculation right. And if you don't get it right, then you've got problems with adverse selection and things could go right pretty quickly. But that's really the idea, is you somehow have to structure it so that the decision of whether or not to buy insurance is not contaminated by the concern about giving up, free care on the other side of the street.
It's a way that potentially to address the crowding out effect, in your opinion?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. I want to begin with my questions with Mr. French. I want to pick up on a comment you made previously. So define for me, my understanding of your work is that rich was defined as the top 2 quintiles. Please tell me what the lowest income level was for the top 2 quintiles.
So I believe that would be on the order of $25,000 in current income for those who are 70 and older. So many of these individuals had much higher income during the working years, but the thresholds, I don't actually have the numbers right on front of me. So, but I believe it's $25,000 for the cut point in terms of the second highest quintile.
Okay, so I would just observe that for the average person who's 70 plus, $25,000 doesn't make them rich. We'll just say it does not pass the smell test. We could go to any 70-year-old who has $25,000 a year of annual income and trying to pay for food, for heating, for transportation needs, and other out-of-pocket expenses. I mean, I just want to put that on the table. Your study also focuses on singles over 72, and if I read your paper correctly, 82% of those folks are women. Is that correct?
So, sorry, could you repeat the question?
The study population was singles over 72.
Correct.
And the demography of that subpopulation was 82% women.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. So there's lots and lots and lots of literature that shows that subset of folks, right, they're going to have much higher healthcare needs in the latter part of life. They're far more likely to have spent down substantial resources, particularly if they had a spouse who was ill and you had to blast through resources during the last few years of the life of a spouse. They're likely to have lower incomes too, if I understood the paper correctly, but I'm a doc, not an economist. So, but I guess my question to you is, I don't understand how you can generalize off of that population, which is, from my perspective, a highly skewed population, and make generalizations about the Medicaid program as a whole.
Right. So I have constructed somewhat similar tables that also do include married individuals. There's always a very difficult question of how to think about lifetime resources of couples versus singles. Of course, when a household loses one spouse, their income tends to decline. And so for that reason, I kept the tables with the spouses out. depending upon how you do it, those at the top of the income distribution, if you do include couples, their Medicaid recipiency rates will wind up being lower. And I definitely don't want to say anything different.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Brown, so walk me through this for a sec. If I heard you correctly, and I may not have, so I'm asking you to correct me if I misheard you, I understood you to say that basically people choose not to buy long-term care insurance because they know Medicaid is there. Is that a correct summary?
It's a simplification, but yes, that's the basic spirit of it. To be a little more precise, many of the payments that an insurance company will have to provide in return for providing you with a private long-term care contract will end up simply paying for expenses that would have otherwise been paid for by Medicaid.
Okay, but...
And as a result, the net benefit to the policy is much smaller than the actual.
Okay, but then help me with that. That does not make sense to me. Because here's the simple fact. Medicaid's not an insurance program. It's a means-tested safety net program. And so ultimately, to get on Medicaid, if you choose not to buy insurance, you actually have to spend down resources.
Correct.
So there is not a trade-off in my mind between purchasing Medicaid and purchasing, or getting to Medicaid and purchasing long-term care insurance, because you will have to spend down personal resources to get to Medicaid. The trade-off is between private insurance and that you could have purchased at some point in your life, and the risk of spending down all of your personal resources to a point of poverty. And my point here, and I want you to push back if you disagree, is I don't know anybody who wants to be on Medicaid. Medicaid's a poverty program, so I guess I'm...
Again, that's not inconsistent, but in the absence of buying, if you, let me step back. At the very high end of the wealth distribution, you're absolutely right. And our studies show that for people that have sufficient wealth, that's exactly the mindset. I don't want to be on it, and they have enough money to where even in the absence of insurance, they could afford 5 years in a nursing home. The median person in the wealth distribution would exhaust their resources if they spent 5 years in a nursing home. And while most people don't spend 5 years in a nursing home, there is a positive probability that that will happen to you. As long as Medicaid is there and is covering those most extreme catastrophic type events, the very events that Dr. Fetter said are the ones that people want to insure against, and we've cut off that tail risk, it lowers the value of buying private insurance. That's very consistent with theory, simulation, and evidence. So that's all I can really say about it.
Okay, no, that's great. I appreciate that.
I also have some problems thinking that people who don't save don't understand their future risk for needing long-term care, and in general, don't calculate what later stages of life will mean for them, are so kind of cognizant of Medicaid that they can really do this comparison and say in their own mind that the cost benefit here is such that I'll forego private insurance and really put my eggs in the Medicaid basket. That's what I have a hard time kind of comprehending.
Look, this doesn't require that people have PhDs in order to do this. All that is required is for people to be able to look around and see that people that don't have insurance are taken care of. And therefore they don't see it as a risk, right? That is consistent with the outcome of our study. We model in a particular way that is assuming that people have a very high level of sophistication. But, it's kind of like the old, billiards example of we can model people's behavior using geometry. That doesn't mean when they go up to hit the ball, that's actually what they're thinking, but it does describe their behavior fairly well. And so that's how I would respond. I also just wanted to point out, sorry, I was poking around here on my iPad, but I wanted to find the right site for it. Norma Coe, who's now at the University of Washington, does have an empirical paper on the issue of spend down. And I just wanted to make sure that that was on your radar screen, because it's, the spend down question is a very hard thing to study, because by definition, if you're trying to hide assets from Medicaid, you're probably also going to hide it from surveyed acres and the like. So she tries to make use of cross-state variation in some of this, and doesn't find big effects, but does find some effect of spin down, particularly for single individuals, less so for married. And I'd be happy to provide that
great.
citation to you guys after the
Thank you. My other question is, we talk about financing. We've talked about public sector, private sector options. I'd be interested in what we know about out-of-pocket spending, and what percentage of the costs of long-term services and supports come from private out-of-pocket payments. I don't know if any of you have any knowledge about that, right?
I think the breakdowns are only about 10% of all long-term care payments are made through sources other than out-of-pocket or long-term care, and I'm sorry, out-of-pocket or Medicaid. And amongst those two sources, it's very close to 50-50. So think of it as 45% of all long-term care expenses are paid for out-of-pocket, 45% by Medicaid, 10% everything else.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Medicare actually pays for a large percentage of the overall share. The numbers that I saw recently from CBO, I thought were more like 37% Medicare, 37% Medicaid, and a big chunk for out-of-pocket of about almost the same amount. So basically, it was kind of those three I thought were the largest shares, and then long-term care insurance picking up the rest.
Those are Medicaid, they're payments to long-term care providers, skilled nursing facilities, and home health agencies, but as several testified earlier, they're not payments for long-term care.
I see.
I would just add one as well. This study now is a little dated, but the facts tend to remain stable over time. I think Brenda Spillman and Peter Kemper did a study of lifetime nursing home use of the elderly and found that 44% of elderly nursing home users paid for their care using only private funds. 44%. 16% began as private payers and exhausted their own resources and converted to Medicaid, and 27% were covered by Medicaid upon admission to the nursing home and throughout their use. The remaining 13% of elderly nursing home users over their lifetime use were covered by Medicare only or other sources. So it's a substantial proportion of people going to the nursing home who are paying their own way throughout their use.
Okay, thank you.
But if I could add to that very briefly?
Yes.
I think it'd be really interesting to see those numbers broken down by length of stay. Because if you do it by stays, there's a lot of very short stays that are paid out of pocket, but for longer stays, those numbers are going to shift rather dramatically.
Okay. Thank you.
This question for Mr. Johnson. All these studies obviously looking backward, because obviously you're dealing with data that has pre-existed the current state of affairs. And I'm curious as to your whether or not the dynamic of longer living populations, which is going to produce more people in retirement post-earnings period, and the adequacy of savings or the inadequacy of savings for post-retirement right now, whether or not we're going to see more people in the sort of the middle third or somewhere in that segment eventually ending up on Medicaid because they're using their savings for the normal costs of living in their 65, 75, and 85. But at some point, that over now 85 is the fastest growing segment of the population. They're going to be in a position where they're going to use Medicaid. So if you look back in 20 years from now, whether you think that there's going to be any change. Now, I recognize you haven't got a crystal ball, but I'm just curious as to whether or not the dynamic you describe of only very low-income populations qualifying for Medicaid is going to be true in 10 or 20 years.
Well, that is a very good question. And at the Urban Institute, we like to think we have a crystal ball because we have this, we have this great model called Dynasim that allows us to project out into the future for 85 years or so. But one of the things that we do find is, as you mentioned, there's this big debate about retirement security and just what the future incomes will be of, let's say, the boomers. What does retirement income look like for future generations? And there's, I think, a lot of hysteria around that topic. And what we find is generally that things aren't quite as bad as what other people are saying, primarily because women are working longer, women are earning more retirement incomes in their own name, and that's offsetting a lot of the decline we're seeing in pension wealth, let's say in the DB pension wealth. At the same time, a lot of this depends on how productivity evolves over time, but if you assume that wages continue to grow at their historical average, the long-term historical average, as the Social Security trustees do, then that translates into much higher wages, much higher Social Security benefits over time, and does kind of lift the overall numbers quite a bit. In terms of what's also really important to this question, though, is understanding how inequality is going to evolve over time. We know that inequality is increasing at working ages, and that's going to evolve into more unequal retirement incomes in the future. So we might see a greater share, so more unequal, more people at the bottom, which could increase Medicaid. The length of disability is a really important part of all of this. And as people are living longer, there's a question how much of those years are going to be disability-free and how many are going to have some period of disability. And most people, no one really knows, obviously, but a lot of the sort of the informed conjecture is that, well, maybe half of the increase in life expectancy will be disability and half will be disability-free. So when we've done some of these projections, we do find that there is more Medicaid use going forward than there has been in the past, just simply because people will be using more services over their lifetimes and spending down more. It's not dramatic, but it is an increase.
The other question, because you made a pretty powerful case that Medicaid users are low income, but I'm going to turn around and ask, what are the demographics of users of long-term services and supports, which is not just low-income populations. It is a population distribution, because I presume wealthy people get disabled and cognitively disabled. So I'm curious as to the overall demographics of the demand for long-term support and services. Because one of the things that clearly in thinking about Medicare adding some long-term support and services benefits is how high in the income scale do you go? I mean, you go obviously above Medicaid, you're going into the general population over 60, and if you look at two ADLs and say, okay, that's the disabled population or the demand for long-term support and services, what are the demographics of that? What is the second quintile, the third quintile, fourth, fifth, or first?
So when we were looking at these numbers and looking at the Medicaid, and I should say we're just focusing on nursing home population, and not other types of long-term care use?
Not assisted living?
No, that's right. No assisted living. When we looked at people going into nursing homes, about a third of them were getting Medicaid-financed nursing home care at some point. So 2/3 were not. And this was, following people from their early 70s to for 18 years, so kind of until their later 80s. Doesn't mean that some of those people won't eventually go into Medicaid when they hit their 90s, but we found that only about a third of them were going on to Medicaid. So you're right, that there's a substantial population that's using nursing homes and that is not qualifying for Medicaid.
Thank you.
Just one question, actually, to Mr. Brown. You concluded that eliminating any one barrier may not sort of move the needle with respect to sales of the private long-term care insurance. Since you have argued that making Medicaid less attractive is unlikely to incent sales, should the commission then instead focus on catastrophic areas of product, or just trying to understand from your conclusions? And so what is, and this is the question I'm going to sort of been asking before, what's the game change if, based on your set of conclusions?
If I had an answer to that, I would have provided it 5 years ago, and maybe we wouldn't need a commission. Unfortunately, what our research shows is that this is just an inherently difficult problem, that if you want to have a means-tested program that ensures that anyone who is low income or ends up with few resources because they've had to spend down, if you want to have a means-tested program that does that, structured like Medicaid is, it's just inherent in the nature of this thing that you're going to crowd out private insurance for at least the bottom half and probably more. So I don't have an easy answer for you. I've thought about, these partnership programs actually do a great job of addressing one of the two problems, which is that they do change the asset disregard. They basically ignore the insurance element or allow you to keep enough of your assets that were protected by the policy, but they don't get at the secondary payer issue. The problem is if you want to make Medicaid a primary payer, you may actually see Medicaid expenditures go up. So you may see us spending more on Medicaid in order to get a larger private market, which sounds a little backwards, but that's exactly what could happen. So I didn't come here offering that I had any magic bullets for you, and I don't.
Thank you very much. I just have 3 quick questions. Number 1, for Mr. French. On page 2 of your slides, you have Medicare does not pay for certain services, for example, nursing homes, and I assume you mean long-term
Yeah, I should have been more precise with that.
Not post-acute. Okay, I just wanted to make sure about that. Secondly, for Mr. Brown, you made a statement there. You said long-term care services, it was in response to someone's question, long-term care services should be an insurable event, correct?
Yeah, what I mean by that is that from a basic theory of insurance perspective, individuals are made better off when they can insure against these events rather than trying to save for them. Because if you save for them and then they don't happen, you end up having resources that you don't consume. So it's a more efficient way to deal with these kind of things.
Do you say that under the context that it is unlikely that you'll need long-term care services?
Let's say it's even, the latest estimates I've seen by Mike Hurd and Suzanne Rowetter just last week coming out of RAND say that, a 50-year-old has more than a 50% chance of needing long-term care. Let's say it's 50%. Saving is a very inefficient way to deal with something that, yeah, there's a 50% chance you'll need it, but there's only a 5% chance that you're going to need it for 8 years. And yet, if you really want to rely only on savings, if you don't have any kind of catastrophic coverage in place and you want to rely only on savings, people are in nursing homes that have been there for 8 or 10 years if they're there because of cognitive impairment. Not many.
Yeah.
But if you really want to fully be protected against it, then you've got to have, $1 million laying around that you're not going to tap unless you, that's an extreme example. But that's the idea. It's a very inefficient way to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very limited subset of people that stay in a nursing home more than a year.
Yeah, but you don't know if you're going to be one of them. That's the problem. I don't mean you, but any individual doesn't know if they're going to be the person that does not enter or ends up in that tail. And if you don't have, now if you have some sort of catastrophic coverage program in place, and this gets back to your question, then if you cover the catastrophic risk, then I do think there's a bigger role for savings, just like we have high deductible health plans. So there, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I just believe your probabilities that you need nursing home care are reasonable. I don't know exactly what they are, but the need that you would have is for a very limited amount of time, not for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and that the proportion of the population, the risk profile of anyone needing that is so de minimis that A, it's unlikely they could ever afford long-term care insurance. And in my opinion, I somewhat disagree. I think you're better off put the money in the bank.
I would go exactly the opposite way, which is because you don't know if you're going to be that 5% that's in the long tail, but you can't save enough to cover for that.
But your premiums are so extremely high. Who's going to pay all that money?
Who's going to pay for your long-term care when you run out of money if you don't have catastrophic coverage in place? That's the question, right? With Medicaid, you spend down and you end up on Medicaid, but that's exactly why you then have less incentive to buy insurance. So, I mean, it's true, it's a low probability, but it's also very unlikely that my house is going to burn down, but I'm not going to go without homeowners insurance.
No, and I agree with you, but again, that is, that's an expense that seems to me to be a manageable expense, whereas we just haven't seen long-term care insurance be a rational, manageable expense. It's so high. Well, look at the track record of it. It's been an abysmal failure. I mean, we've heard how much testimony about that today.
All I'm saying, I'm not talking about the state of the current long-term care market. I'm simply saying that based on first principles, individuals are made better off when they can insure against uncertain events that have catastrophic outcomes.
And on a theory,
and that's a much better way to deal with it than to try to save for a low probability event. The fact that you think it's low probability, you're going to have a long stay is exactly why it's inefficient.
And if it were such a low probability, you would expect that the premium would be relatively low and manageable. Because more people would access it.
So I have research showing that the loads on long-term care insurance are quite large. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that the existing market is perfectly efficient. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, that this is a risk that in an ideal world you would like to insure against because private saving is not an efficient way to handle it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I have one question? No.
It's tough up here.
I'm afraid to see George afterwards under these circumstances. But, and I think that Mr. Brown has been pretty clear on what he would recommend, so I think this question is for the other three of you whomever might want to address this. There's been discussion about whether there is asset transfer, or if there isn't asset transfer, how much of it there is. Again, questions about whether there is or is not crowd out, and looking at the data in terms of what you all were saying, that such a large proportion of people who are using long-term care public resources are low income. I guess my question for you is, what are you recommending that we do? We know that there is this large baby boomer population that's going to be needing long-term services and supports. There is a growing number of people, younger people with disabilities that are going to be relying on, are now and will be increasing. And so I guess what I'm not hearing is from you all what you would suggest. With the dialogue that just went on was savings versus long-term care insurance. Are there other options out there? Do you recommend either of those, or are we simply going to increase Medicaid by taxing the people who are already lower income further, or what would you suggest?
As an employee of the Fed, I should probably be quiet on that one.
Speaking Fed speak.
You can speak on your own behalf. How's that? Seriously, we'd love to hear your ideas on this. I mean, this is literally what we're wrestling with. So to the degree you have personal opinions separate and apart from your organizations, we'd love to hear them.
Well, Eric. He's about to speak, I see.
No, I thought some of the proposals made in the previous session were very good ones. I think, as Jeff has pointed out, these are probably only going to have very small impacts in terms of the share of people who are actually insured. But perhaps getting from 10 to 15% of the population being insured, maybe that's of some value.
I would just echo what Jeff said earlier, which is that there aren't a lot of good options to me. What seems most what is most appealing is probably not politically feasible, which is trying to add some of these services to Medicare and extending them to younger populations as well. It just seems that it's very hard to have a voluntary insurance system that's going to work. The reason why I guess this commission exists is because we tried a voluntary public system and realized before it was implemented that it couldn't work. And it seems that the only way something like this is going to work would be to have a mandatory system.
And I guess as part of that, and Ms. O'Brien, please jump in. The age at which you were focusing on people being low income was at older ages. So at younger ages, they may indeed have had larger incomes. So whether they put money aside in long-term care insurance or by savings, are there other ways to capture private money to put into the long-term care system other than depending on public dollars?
So what Ellen referred to some of the research I had done earlier. That was looking at lifetime earnings. And what we found there, so not looking at how much you were able to save, just looking at how much you earned, both you and your spouse, over your lifetimes. And there, what we found was that most people who were going on to Medicaid were in the bottom 40% of that lifetime distribution, unlikely to be able to devote much to long-term care savings. And I think if you look at the history of 401k plans where participation rates are not particularly high, where very few people are maxing out as it is, and given the concerns about general retirement security, the idea of siphoning off some of those funds to long-term care is a little discouraging, I think.
And I might just relate that to a Medicaid finance problem as well. We've seen states under tremendous fiscal pressure in the current environment, and we've seen cuts in Medicaid, including Medicaid long-term care. And so I just raised the issue that that continuing pressure with the demographic change that Rich talks about raises a real issue about the sustainability of the current Medicaid approach to Medicaid finance. We've seen that the states with the largest projected growth in the elderly populations are the states that invest the least in Medicaid today. And so that's going to create potentially some pressure. You'll see more and more inequity across the nation in how the generosity of Medicaid's long-term care benefits, and that would tend to push you in the direction of needing to consider an alternative financing option, perhaps a social insurance option.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually kind of want to follow up on that a little bit. Mr. Brown, I'm getting the impression from some of the earlier questioners that our earlier panel in terms of ways to reform the long-term care insurance market, that your research has led you to conclude that those reforms, if not necessarily a fool's errand, would certainly only improve things at the margins because the catastrophic benefit provided by Medicaid is the 800-pound elephant in the room that kind of dominates that, if that's correct. And then somewhat related to that, is it possible to quantify the fiscal effects of that on the Medicaid program and on states? I know you've looked at it more from the individual perspective in terms of the crowd-out effects and all that sort of stuff. Quantify the effect on spending, because obviously, and we've talked about this in a variety of settings at our hearings, the fiscal impact both to the federal government and the states are very constrained, and states have to deal with balanced budget requirements, as we heard in our first panel this morning.
So yeah, I think your initial characterization is correct. It's not that other things won't matter. It's just that they're going to be small relative to the underinsurance population. So as I've stated before, when you have a really small fraction of people insured, you might be able to enlarge that market in a substantial way, but you're still going to leave the vast majority of the population uncovered. That doesn't mean some of these things aren't worth doing. I don't mean to imply that. It's just that it's not, as you said, it's not the 800-pound gorilla. As far as putting dollar estimates on these effects, is it possible? Yes. Have I done it? No. Am I in a position to share those results with you? On the very tight timetable in which this commission is operating, probably not, but I'd be happy to talk to you about at least how to think about that.
I mean, I think that would be interesting, and that would certainly be something I think a lot of states would be interested in, policymakers here in Washington as well. Mr. French, I kind of wanted to follow up, and actually Mr. Johnson mentioned some of this in his testimony in terms of future income projections, which of course are always hazy going out in the future. But I recall seeing a Kaiser Family Foundation study from a year or two ago talking about, and this is off the top of my head, so I hope I'm characterizing it correctly, basically that the projection of individuals with incomes of over 500% of poverty is projected to something like double over the next 20 to 25 years or thereabout. Certainly 500% of poverty is not rich by any stretch of the imagination, particularly for the senior population. By the same token, it's not destitute either. So my question is whether you've studied some of these effects on upper income quintiles and percentages, drawing on the Medicaid benefit and utilizing that benefit over any kind of longitudinal, study over time, and then if those are in fact the demographic projections going out 20, 30 years, is it possible that the data might get skewed upwards a little bit more because of where things are going on income projections?
Right. So America is becoming a more unequal society in terms of income. So this naturally implies that more and more people are going to be making many, many times the poverty line. Just in terms of specifics relating to the Medicaid utilization of people who would be at least 500% of the poverty line, that would, not exactly, but that would roughly correspond to those in the top income quintile in my groups. And for that group, that would, they have a 5% Medicaid recipiency rate. I have broken this down by age, and of course, amongst those who are at the top of the income distribution, when they're young, quote, 70, the Medicaid recipiency rate is, of course, much lower. The Medicaid recipiency rate of those in the top of the income distribution, the top quintile of, it'll rise to about 20% once individuals reach their 90s.
So then, is it also is it also related not just to where income projections are, but then longevity projections? And if the two of them are linked, for instance, because those with incomes in the top quintile live longer, therefore they're also more likely to go on Medicaid at some point because of their longevity. So if that trend skews along with the income trend, then you would see further skewing of that.
Yeah, that's potentially the case.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner Claypool.
Thank you. And thank you again for being here and wrapping us up. This is, I think, the last round of questions. But I wanted to go to you, Mr. Brown, and just, again, kind of come back to the question. The last exchange you had about whether or not Medicaid was really kind of crowding out long-term care insurance. You made a statement of people look around and they see that others are being taken care of. And is that the best way to characterize it? Because if that's really the threshold for the support of your argument, aren't there a variety of other factors that might really pull at this individual for their attention? By way of example, they may be paying down debt from their own education. They may be saving for their children's education. They may be preparing for their own retirement. So it seems not entirely logical that there would be you would be able to draw a strong correlation between the existence of Medicaid, which not many people really quite understand how it works or whether or not it pays for long-term care insurance. I give you your point that generally people may be taken care of, but to believe that that fact is crowding out the purchase of long-term care insurance really is, I'm still struggling with it. And I know you've made the point a number of times, so.
No, it's okay. But let me go back to the very first point that I hoped, or at least intended to make, which is we are not and never have claimed that the Medicaid implicit tax or the Medicaid crowd out is the explanation of the small size of the market, and that if only we would eliminate this, suddenly everything would be fine. We've never claimed that. What we have said is even in a world where people were behaving rationally and where there were no problems in the market, this would be sufficient to prevent the private market from ever being very large. I am very sympathetic to the views, and some of my own research supports, that people have decision-making biases, that they're not always forward-looking in their planning, and that there are a whole host of other reasons that might prevent them from buying insurance, even if we didn't have a Medicaid program. Nothing I've said is inconsistent with that. But most of those biases go in the direction of people not buying insurance, not in the direction of buying insurance. That is why I've also said that even if you somehow eliminated the implicit tax on Medicaid, you might not solve the problem because there are all these other factors at play that might still constrain the market.
It would be fair to characterize your statement then as Medicaid is a factor among others, and you really can't weigh them.
What I would say is that Medicaid by itself is sufficient to explain the small size of the market. Okay. That's about as strong of a statement as I can make. It is sufficient to explain it, and that even if you solve everything else, then you're still going to have a problem to solve.
And then in your exchange around insurance, and which I appreciate, and the back and forth, that I look to the challenges that the private long-term care insurance products have faced, and then start to think about what are other options. We could have a public insurance program that would be available. And if we look at how they fare in comparison, we see the general population fairly satisfied with a public health insurance program like Medicare. And it stands up fairly well against a private health insurance. People are fairly well satisfied with Medicare compared to Medicaid, compared to their private health insurance. And I'm just making, I guess, putting something out there for our consideration, that perhaps building a public insurance option might stand up as well over time as Medicare has, and people would rally around it and not have to go through what, unfortunately, many Americans are dealing with right now when they purchase long-term care insurance. They've found themselves left without the type of protection that they thought they were making an investment in. So a general statement, and then a final question for Rich. Going forward, is there anything your crystal ball tells you about what's going to happen as we move the tail end of this baby boom population, which I actually represent, is not attached in many cases to a real defined benefit retirement program, and we're really looking at people that are participating in defined contributions, and what does that mean for their ability to, accumulate any wealth or be prepared for retirement?
That is a big uncertainty, I think, about exactly how that's going to play out. One of the real challenges with the defined contribution plan is that most people don't annuitize those assets, and so how they end up spending that money can have a big impact on their retirement security. We know that people aren't saving as much in those plans as we would like, and so that creates some challenges going forward, but we also know that the traditional defined benefit plan system didn't always work that well either. And there are a lot of people, particularly those who change jobs and frequently never accumulated much. A lot of people never had coverage to begin with. So in our crystal ball, which is based on a lot of assumptions, we find that the average pension wealth is declining a bit, will decline a bit over time, but it's not falling off the cliff or anything. And overall, things are not so bad, but the biggest challenge is medical expenses that are rising, and then, but most importantly, long-term care expenses. And that's really what is, from what we're seeing, the income seems okay. It's the long-term care expenses that are the major challenge for the boomers and later generations.
Great. On behalf of the entire commission, I want to thank all of you for being here. Again, this is one of the most prickly areas, and we appreciate you kind of walking through us with this, walking with us through this issue. With that, I want to thank everybody for being here today. The commission's open session is done for the day. I know that there are people who are watching this live, and for those of you who are in the room, I'll say it one last time. We are completely open and want public testimony, so you can go in through the website, www.ltccommission.senate.gov, and there are instructions for how an organization or individual can do that. We encourage that. We all got our memory sticks today, so we have plenty of reading for our plane trips home, for those of us who are planing home. The next commission meeting will be August 19th. There will be information forthcoming about the structure of that meeting shortly. Thank you all for being here.